my first memory is an airstrike. My parents, they tried to conceal the conflict from us to give us sort of a sense of normalcy. So they told us it was thunder. The next day I walked on the street and I saw charred floppy disks, newspapers and machinery, so it was unmistakable. He had colon cancer, which was treatable. He was a doctor himself. In his final days, he would basically get thinner and thinner, and weather in front of our eyes is nothing to do about it. I would go to my room and pray all day and all night until I fall asleep. God, please take me, not him. Because I studied in Palestinian schools my entire life. Do you think that a textbook is what would lead you to understand Israel's occupation, or your lived experience of it? Like if you read about someone firing a slingshot and it asks you what is the velocity and the speed of the stone that's being thrown, would that inspire you to become a Hamas member? Early on I thought I was like stuck in the movie The Others, or I was some sort of vampire I was talking to avoid, and I was cracking jokes and nobody was laughing, so I was like, am I that unfunny as my wife says?
No, we just, I mean, you probably are, but because your wife knows you much better than we do. Anas, I'm going to count myself down. Is that good, Anas? 3, 2, 1. Hi, good day, and welcome to another episode of Unapologetic. Today, I'm joined by Mohammed Shehada, who is a Palestinian journalist, analyst, commentator who is from Gaza, but now lives in Copenhagen. Mohammed, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mohammed, thank you for making time for this interview. You're a very busy person, and obviously you are witnessing and seeing a lot of devastation. So thank you for your time. As I've just been speaking to you off camera, the focus of today's discussion, when I messaged you and I WhatsApped you, it's like we're going to speak about how Israel is targeting the press, and that's specifically because of the fact that Al Jazeera killed a bunch of journalists, many journalists, 5 from Al Jazeera, most prominent of them Anas al-Sharif on Sunday night. But it's also a much more broader look at the systematic attack on journalism in Gaza since 2005. But more specific, I mean, even beyond that, sort of what we've been talking about now is a systematic genocide, which has been accelerated in the last 2 years, but really has an ethnic cleansing, which definitely started in 1948 and has continued in slow degrees, and has really been to try to strangle the Palestinian people. So thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your show, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. I mean, we're discussing just before we actually started live where we want to start the story. And I told you that we probably will start the story in 2008 during Israel's operation there, when Al Jazeera prominently had to, Al Jazeera Arabic was reporting as well, but in the international English-speaking world, Ayman Mohyeddin and Shireen Tadros were very prominent reporters. But you made a very good point. You said, actually, why don't we start before that? Let's start when you were first in Gaza, or when you first moved to Gaza or your first memory in Gaza. So let's start with that. What's your first memory in Gaza?
Well, basically, my first memory is an airstrike, and it was, ironically enough, it was an airstrike on a newspaper office right next to our home. My parents, they tried to conceal the conflict from us to give us sort of a sense of normalcy. It was like a desperate pursuit of bringing up with their kids with as little mental problems from the conflict as possible. So they told us it was thunder. The next day I walked on the street and I saw charred floppy disks, newspapers and machinery, so it was unmistakable. But basically, like, I ended up in Gaza with a long detour. So my grandfather was kicked out from a village called Hamama into Gaza in 1948. And then he lived in a tent, started to build things up. As soon as he managed to build a house with asbestos and aluminium, it was basically a shack. As soon as he managed to build that up and planted a fig tree to remind him of his village, Israel occupied Gaza in 1967 and kicked him out of Gaza immediately, along with about 38,000 people. He ended up in Egypt. Then the Oslo Accords are signed, and he's kicked out of Egypt to Gaza again. And my father ever since maintained the mentality until his death that since Israel did it to us 2 times and the Egyptians once, it'll happen another time. We thought he was thinking too much about this, but he was vindicated now, and he's been proven right.
Just a few things I want to pick up on what you said. So you said Hamama. So Hamama was in what's now called, what's in Israel proper today, Green Line Israel. Where exactly was the village Hamama that your grandfather was kicked out of?
So Hamama and Majdal, I think they've been now replaced by Ashkelon. Hamama in particular, it was turned into a landfill, completely obliterated, raised nothing left of it. I know because there was one time where my father crossed through Israel into Gaza, and then he told us that there was nothing left of the village. It doesn't exist anymore. It's basically this area of villages were depopulated and ethnically cleansed months after Israel's
So this is just very close to the
creation.
border of
So
of
Israel
the
was
current
created
Gaza
in
Strip.
May.
Yep.
Yeah, so Hamama was depopulated around November, and Majdal was depopulated much later. It took until, I think, the year 1951 until Israel depopulated it completely. People stayed there. Israel tried everything to kick them out. The head of the Israeli labor union pleaded with Ben Gurion to allow them to stay there to create sort of like a picture, perfect picture of coexistence. But Ben Gurion eventually got fed up, put them on trucks, and sent them to Gaza. And that's where Anas El Sharif is from. He's from Ashkelon, Majdal. So that's, you see, basically Israelis now, even after his murder, bringing it up that he yearned to the day of seeing Majdal as something that would be indicting him or incriminating him, although they're the ones that took over.
So just, for the audience to help them. So this is literally like about a 10, 15 kilometer strip along the Gaza border where all these villages are, which were depopulated. And Anas al-Sharif, I'm guessing his grandfather was also from there. Yep. No, continue.
Yeah, so my first memory, I said, is an airstrike. The second one would be basically Israeli checkpoints, because Gaza was filled with them. It was called the Five Fingers Policy. There were 21 Israeli settlements surrounded by swarms of Israeli army, troops, and checkpoints. And Gaza was dissected into 5 pieces. So wherever you wanted to move from one area to the other, it could take you a whole day. Although it takes 20 minutes by car from Gaza City to Rafah, you can be stuck there for days. There was a checkpoint called Abu Holi, the most notorious, where Israel did not allow anyone to go on foot. Everyone had to be in a vehicle and wait there for a whole day, for many hours, baking in the sun. Vehicles were overcrowded because there's a shortage of vehicles and a lot of people that want to cross. So in a vehicle that, just a normal car that can accommodate 5 people, we could be 8 or more people sitting on each other's laps. And my memory is basically my mom and father telling me, don't step out of the car, don't open any windows, no matter what. The heat is suffocating. We wanted water, we wanted to step out, and they're like, no, don't step out, don't open the windows, don't open the doors. And we were, at some point, I remember that one guy was shot when he tried to basically wash his head and cool off. The soldier, you wouldn't see their face. They're sitting manning the checkpoint from a watchtower, and they decided arbitrarily when to open it and when to close it. But the thing that I wanted to say, my third memory of Gaza is my UNRWA school for refugees. Basically, every single kid there on the first day would ask each other, which village do you come from? And none of them were native to Gaza. More than 2/3 of Gaza's population are refugees or descendants of refugees. So they would compare, and it was a matter of pride. I'm from Jaffa, I'm from Hamama, I'm from Jerusalem, from Hebron, from all over the map, which is why Gaza became basically the Cape Town of Palestine. Cape Town, what made it different from the Bantustans is that the Bantustans were largely homogeneous. You can easily bribe the chief of the clan, appoint them as the heads of the Bantustan, and therefore contain and suppress their relatives, their kinships. But in Cape Town, it was basically the workers from all over the country that came there. So it was a mosaic of the entire South African population, proliferating national identity, and basically an undying insurgency. No matter what apartheid South Africa tried to do, people in Cape Town refused to bow down. And it's the same in Gaza. The undying insurgency in Gaza is no coincidence that the first intifada started from Jabalia. And Gaza has been sort of like the fortress of resistance since its creation. It's why Israel from 1948, as soon as Gaza became the Gaza that we know, Israel tries to depopulate it immediately with everything possible: terror campaigns, bombings, killings, invasions, and even bribery. They tried all of it. None of it worked.
Yeah, I just want to go back. I mean, you mentioned your first memory when you were 4 years old. So just what year was that? When? I mean, how old are you now? So when were you 4 years old? Was this like 2002, 3? Before that?
No, I don't remember my age precisely at that point. I think I was either 4 to 6, between that age. The newspaper was called Al Risala. I can try to look it up and see the precise year.
No, that's fine. I mean,
and
that's fine.
Yep. But basically, like you see, Israel has been trying to target Palestinian journalists and Palestinian media since its inception, from the very beginning. They tried to ban a lot of publications. They tried to take them out of business in the West Bank, in Gaza, inside Israel itself. It's been systematic. That's one of the reasons why, if you go to Gaza or the West Bank, you will find all homes, or most homes, graffitied upon with messages, nationalistic slogans, or calls for marches or protests, because Israel was banning publications, they were banning print, and they were banning university gatherings. They saw campuses as what they called hotbeds of terrorism and nationalism. And every time they tried to suppress it, Palestinians came with a different idea, like graffitiing on walls and communicating this way. At some point, people would like graffiti love messages or proposals, like a marriage proposal or any sort of message that they wanted to get across. And it's also why one of the reasons the watermelon became our symbol. It's because of Israel banning the Palestinian flag, that Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and inside Israel resorted to the watermelon instead. It was that ridiculous. You're not allowed to wear the combination, even if it's just a combination of those colors. You're not allowed to wear it. So the watermelon was the only alternative that they couldn't criminalize very easily.
What do you remember about when, Israel always says, and all these Israeli commentators always say on television, that Israel left Gaza in 2005 and it's been completely free, and Hamas has then run it down, and the Palestinians have not been able to, prosper and stuff like that, which we all know is a lie, because Israel has continued to strangle Palestine and Palestinian existence and sanction everything extremely heavily. But what do you remember about that pullout? I mean, the settlers did leave, because obviously checkpoints now had come to an end, and there was a new hell, which was a massive siege. But what do you remember about that time? You were still probably very young, and just how did that change your life?
I remember it very distinctly. There are two episodes that are very vivid in my head. One is the immediate aftermath of the Oslo Accords. I was a child at the time, but I remember, like, my mom, one of the reasons why she insisted on us moving to Gaza and forced my dad to do it was basically to raise us up in the homeland, to return. And my father's opinion was that Oslo was a sham and it wouldn't lead to anything. So he preferred the certainty of Egypt than moving back. So basically, as soon as we moved to Gaza, my father was vindicated. The New York Times itself ran an article in 1995. And in that article, they interviewed people in Gaza. It was titled, "Palestinians in Gaza Learn Freedom Has Its Limits." And the most resonant word that is used by the interviewees in Gaza is open air prison, open air prison. They use it over and over again. So that was the idea back then. Like, in the same year that Israel signs Oslo, they start building the fence, the separation fence around Gaza, and completely separate it from the West Bank geographically and in any sense of the word, even culturally. At some point, Israel is forced to open what was called the safe corridor between Gaza and the West Bank. I think in 1998, Clinton forced the Israeli government to do it. And as soon as they did this, there's sort of the stereotyping campaign of Palestinians from Gaza is deliberately manufactured across the West Bank to portray Gazans as lesser humans, even in the eyes of West Bank Palestinians, to portray us as poor savages. We're here to steal the jobs. We're here to take over. And even like the sexual predator trope was used at the time. So it becomes sort of more and more causing tensions with the safe corridor, until at some point it was rumored that the governor of Ramallah asked the Israeli military to close the safe corridor. That was the Israeli pretext at the time, but of course they wanted to maintain the separation. 2005 was doubling down on this, separating Gaza. It was like the biggest act of gerrymandering. If you look at the record at the time, Israel's government is very clear. This is all about the demographic bomb. We want to isolate, cut off as many of the millions of Palestinians as possible. In case we get to the inevitability of the one state, we can get rid of the 2 million in Gaza in that scenario. And you see Israelis like Ehud Olmert, who was deputy prime minister, saying on the record something like, the Palestinians are moving from an Algerian model to a South African model. And that's a much cleaner struggle. That's more sanitized. That's more difficult for us to attack and defame and delegitimize. So we need to do this act of demographic preemptive engineering to cut the Palestinians in Gaza off. So that was the Israeli rationale, the first one. There was a number of them. The second one was basically Israel saying on the record, it'll become much easier for us to bomb Gaza 10 times more aggressively and violently than when Israeli settlers are there. We can act without any restraint. So until 2005, my memory of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, it was mainly the Apache helicopters. As soon as Israel pulls out, one of my first memories immediately afterwards is Israeli F-16 bombs being dropped like candy. You had what was called the Mahraqa of Jabalia, the burning of Jabalia, I think around 2006. And then you had a similar episode in 2008, and then Operation Castlet at the end of 2008. One of the other rationales of the disengagement was basically to destroy the Palestinian economy while simultaneously giving Palestinians a test they can never succeed at, which is build a Singapore while remaining completely cut off from the world and with an economy that's suffering what Sarah Roy, the leading economist at Harvard, described as the worst depression in modern history. Basically, what Israel did, and it says so in the disengagement plan itself, it says that it would cut Gaza's entire labor force until it ceases completely. So when my dad moved to Gaza, 1994, a cousin of his comes and visits, and my dad was a medical doctor, and his cousin asked him one simple question. He says, "How much money do you make per month?" And it wasn't that fancy salary. And his cousin responds, laughing, and he says, "I make that in a single day working in Israel." You had a lot of manual workers from Gaza in Israel and in the West Bank and in other areas in Jerusalem. And then 2005 comes, and that cousin of my dad comes to our home again, this time begging for a handout, because overnight, all of those tens of thousands of workers were cut off from their main source of income. The other thing is that the disengagement was done unilaterally in a way to humiliate the Palestinian Authority. So that's something I remember vividly, where basically, as soon as Israel disengages, Hamas, they hang up posters in Gaza that are saying, negotiations led nowhere, our armed struggle liberated Gaza, and we can do so in the West Bank. The PA couldn't claim it as a fruit of the so-called peace process because it was unilateral. It was not coordinated with them on purpose. And you had the Israeli Prime Minister's advisor, Dov Westglass, saying on the record, we are withdrawing from Gaza to freeze, to kill the peace process, to take it off the agenda, the Palestinian question, to disappear it for as long as it takes. They were very obvious about all of these. On the ground, as soon as the disengagement happens, like in the days in the run-up to it, we had settlers in Gaza marching on the beach, marching through the streets, surrounded by the military. So it was days of curfew. My parents were like, you don't go anywhere. You don't step outside the house, not even playing with your friends. And then the disengagement happens. At my school, they went on a school trip to see the areas that settlements used to be in, 21 settlements. And basically, Israel dismantled homes like Legos. They took everything with them. There was one PR stunt. It was basically what Israel keeps referring to as the greenhouses that they left in Gaza. But the philanthropist himself that left these greenhouses in Gaza admitted later on, Peter Beinart wrote about it in Haaretz in 2014, and that those greenhouses, their own creator says that Israel's blockade, the siege on Gaza, is what killed the greenhouses. It was not Gazans paying back the greenhouses by dismantling it and then using it to recycle it into rockets. And then he says that in Gaza, actually people built way more greenhouses after, but Israel was banning any exports from Gaza. All imports were limited to what Israel deemed strictly as humanitarian necessities. So in one incident, they banned pasta, but they allowed rice. They banned chocolates, baby chicks, chips, cattle, etc. They even banned coriander and allowed parsley. It was completely random. And the other thing is basically like people went to the settlements in my school to see what was there. It was largely just an empty area. Some people found like random items. I remember a teacher found a pair of glasses, and that was it. It was sort of like something that you treasure. You're stepping on Palestinian land for the first time in your life because those settlements started in the 70s. It's a no-go zone for any Palestinian. And you're stepping there for the first time. It has this moment of reverence to it. And in the immediate aftermath, the settlements are gone. The year after, you had George Bush insisting on Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, to hold elections.
Sorry to interrupt you, but just for the audience, right? So how old were you when the disengagement takes place? 2005?
So I was about 10 years old.
Okay, it allows us to center your story. Okay, continue.
Yep. Yeah, but it's like all of these things, I think the memory is enhanced by an element of trauma. When you're traumatized and you have adrenaline rushing through, you remember all the details, the smell, what happened there, the sound, the names, all of it. It comes to your mind over and over and over again. So there's this element, like I have friends that say you have a super memory, and I don't see it as a
You do.
compliment. I think like my memory is enhanced by the trauma and the
course, yes.
PTSD. But so basically, the year after, George Bush insists on Mahmoud Abbas to hold national elections for the parliament. And Abbas keeps saying Hamas would win, Hamas would win. And Bush says you still have to hold the elections. And Bush even goes to Turkey and Qatar, and he asks them to pressure Hamas to run in those elections. And Hamas ran on a slate that had nothing to do with one state, two state, liberation, river to the sea, all of this. It was a simple campaign. It was called Reform and Change, economic reform and change of corruption. They basically told Gazans, look around you. You cannot survive. You cannot put food on the table. You don't have any income. You don't have any jobs. Prices are astronomical, and the Palestinian Authority is dysfunctional. We're going to eliminate all of this. We're going to have good governance. And they basically won. They didn't win a majority of the vote. They won, I think, about 43%, a plurality. But the election system was different. It was not sort of like proportional representation. And Fatah ran basically on two slates. And Fatah was not given any sort of victory by its backers, Europe, Washington, Israel, any of those, or even Arab countries. They had nothing to brag with in their election campaign. They had nothing to brag about except their old history in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But from the Oslo on onwards, there was nothing to brag about. And that's been traditionally the strongest element of Hamas's strength, is to basically point at the foiling of Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. If you ask a Hamas leader, why don't you recognize Israel? He would immediately and intuitively say, Mahmoud Abbas did this. He renounced armed resistance. He arrests and detains Palestinians that try to engage in armed resistance. He collaborates with Israel. He engages in the peace process endlessly, no matter how much it takes. He negotiated for decades. He got nothing out of it. And not only that he got nothing out of it, he's being smeared as a terrorist in a suit. And you have always those Europeans and Americans. Every time I go to one of those meetings, it's like they can't hold it inside them. They need to both side what Israel is doing, a genocide, with what Palestinians are doing. And the only thing they keep bringing up is the textbooks, the Palestinian Authority's textbooks. In this physics textbook, there's an example of a slingshot. That slingshot can indoctrinate someone into hating Israel. Seriously. Like I studied Palestinian textbooks. I studied in Palestinian schools my entire life. Do you think that a textbook is what would lead you to understand Israel's occupation, or your lived experience of it? Like if you read about someone firing a slingshot and it asks you what is the velocity and the speed of the stone that's being thrown, would that inspire you to become a Hamas member? It's absolutely insane. Like Hamas's leaders, like Abdelaziz Rantisi and Ismail Haniyeh and others, a lot of them either had their parents killed by Israel or one of their parents killed by Israel, or they grew up orphaned. Ismail Haniyeh grew up an orphan. Rantisi was a survivor of the Khan Yunis massacre. In Hamas, there's this elite Nukhba unit. Most members in the elite Nukhba are basically people who lost family members who've been killed by Israel. Basically, like the idea that a textbook would lead you there, it's insane, and it's been studied over and over and over again. There was a commission that was created under John Kerry, 2013, that looked into Palestinian textbooks, Israeli textbooks, and they found like they were shocked by Israeli ultra-Orthodox textbooks describing Palestinians and Arabs and animals and insects and creatures and under creatures, etc. And they found lots of incitement in Israeli textbooks, and they recommended creating a committee to reform the textbooks for both sides. The Palestinian Authority welcomed it. Israel rejected it out of hand. So anyways, you still have all of those countries that are humiliating the PA nonstop about the textbooks and trying to come up with any non-existent issue to both sides. And then you have Israel withholding PA funds, defanging the PA, cutting off its wings, not allowing it to do its work. The mayor of Jenin was recently contacted by the IDF. They told him this, a simple proposal. We just rampaged through Jenin. We destroyed a lot of things. We destroyed infrastructure. We will give you money directly from the money that we're withholding from the Palestinian Authority's budget. We will give it to you to rebuild that road. or we can help you to get funding from a specific Arabic country that I'm not going to name, but it's an obvious one. And basically, the guy goes to the Palestinian Authority because he's part of it, and he says, Israel offered me this and that. And the PA gives him the money to build the road. He builds the road, the IDF goes and destroys it again. Then they go to him again. We will give you the money directly from the money we are pirating and stealing from the PA or from that Arab country. Otherwise, don't go to the PA for help. So, like, there's this process of dismantling, weakening, disintegrating the PA and limiting its function to the security collaboration. That made it very easy for Hamas to succeed. All they needed to do is just point at how the PA is doing. But as soon as Hamas won 2006, this time around, my father's cousin, the one that used to work in Israel, he didn't come to my father for a handout because my father himself needed a handout. So the entire Palestinian Authority was immediately bankrupted, defunded by its backers, by its patrons. Europe, the US, and Israel withheld all its funding. The revenue, the tax revenue that Israel collects every month on behalf of the Palestinian Authority and then takes a huge commission out of it and then sends it to the PA, it became a tool of containment, collective punishment, and suppression. Like, I remember this chronology. My father, at the end of the month, he didn't get any salary for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And then why is that? Because Yasser Arafat is doing some diplomatic or advocacy work or legal work. Mahmoud Abbas is going to the United Nations, or this happening, or that is happening. So it's like complete nonsense, punishment just for a political decision that the PA is taking. As soon as Hamas wins, Israel decides, okay, they're not going to get a penny. No one in the Palestinian Authority would. At the same time, the US started to funnel funds to this security force that was part of the Palestinian Authority. It was called the Executive Force, قوة تنفيذية. And the explicit goal was to overthrow the Hamas government. So it was a multifaceted campaign: punish, humiliate the Palestinian population, especially in Gaza, for voting the people that we don't like, and then coup Hamas by force. And Hamas preempts that coup. It was reported in Vanity Fair at the time. And you had this mini civil war going on in Gaza. Basically, I would say, like, was Hamas capable of delivering on the promise of reform and change? We'll never know. They never got a chance. I come from a family of Fatah. My father was a Fatah member. My uncle, every single member of my family. I have a lot of beef with Hamas, but fair is fair. Did they get a chance to rule? No. And you had Tony Blair himself. I don't think Tony Blair is a Hamas apologist. He came out, I think, around 2018, 2019. It was reported in The Guardian where he's saying something like, we could have done business with Hamas. It was a mistake to boycott and defund that government. Thanks for joining the club now, over a decade later. So you had all of those people without salaries boiling for a year. And in that year, you had people that would go out and fire Kalashnikovs in the street or burn tires or do any forms of protest. And then the simmering tension, the social strife, it's all sort of manufactured. It's all being built up to lead Gaza towards down that path. And then you had the mini sort of civil war that ends with Hamas taking over Gaza. Before that civil war, Hamas did two things as olive branches to Israel and the US. So if you open Google and write the following, Haaretz, we could have made peace, and then fill the gap with the name of a Hamas leader, you would find an article. So write Haaretz, we could have made peace with Ahmed Yassin. That's the co-founder of Hamas, the old imam on a wheelchair. He was completely paralyzed. And Ahmed Yassin, an article in Haaretz where he basically, his interrogator in the Shin Bet says, we could have totally made peace with that guy. We could have totally gotten to a two-state solution. And one interesting fact that his interrogator chooses to mention is that he asked Ahmed Yassin about the bus bombings in the 90s and about Hamas's armed resistance and violent events inside Israel, in the West Bank, in Gaza. And Ahmed Yassin responds this. He says, we had good teachers. We learned from you. It's the same answer that Edward Said gave when he was asked once about the killing of civilians. He said, this is terrorism, it's wanton murder, but Israel is the one that brought it to our region. If you look back in history, the earliest bus bombings, market bombings, were carried out by the Israeli militias, the Haganah, Ergun, Lehi, etc. They would go into a market full of people and detonate a bomb, or they would go into the King David Hotel, or they would kill the peace mediator, Volk Bernadotte, that came to Palestine to try to create a solution between Jews and Arabs, or they would the systematic terrorist attacks that were carried out at the time, it's in the hundreds. So back to the point with 2006, Hamas extends one olive branch under Ismail Haniyeh. They send a letter to George Bush and they say, we are willing to cease hostilities, mutual cessation of hostilities between both sides, and move towards the two-state solution on a basis of a permanent ceasefire. That's just a starting point. They don't have to offer everything from the first letter. It's the basic negotiating tactic. You don't compromise on everything, on Jerusalem, the refugees, the West Bank, 2% here, land swaps there, before you actually enter the negotiations. And what leverage do you have? Israel's response and Washington's response was to completely ignore this, not even report on it. It was reported on in Haaretz, and that was it. There was another more prominent olive branch. So Ahmed Yousef's chief advisor, he is called Ahmed Yousef. That is Ismail Haniyeh's chief advisor, Ahmed Yousef. So Ahmed Yousef lived most of his adult life in the United States, same as Musa Abu Marzouk, Hamas's first political bureau chief. They both lived in the US. Yousef was invited regularly to the White House at those dinners arranged by Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton and previous administrations. He was an active member of the Muslim community there. Like, that's the ridiculous part, is that the Mujahideen, jihad, was a trendy word in Washington at the time, in the 80s and early 90s. It wasn't until it was used against Israel that it became a taboo. So if you remember, in the 80s, like Hamas, when they formed their military wing, they didn't want to call it first the Izz al-Din Qassam Brigades. They wanted to call it Abdullah Azzam Brigades. Abdullah Azzam is a Gazan imam that was the chief recruiter for Mujahideen, and he would provide them with training, with weaponry in Pakistan, and then send them to Afghanistan. He literally ran what was called Maktab Khadamat al-Mujahideen, the office of the Mujahideen services, which had branches all over Europe and the US. So you would literally find a sign on the street saying, here, come and join the jihad. And you had Margaret Thatcher going to Afghanistan and telling the people there, the Mujahideen, you are the heart, you are our eyes, you are our souls, you are our hearts, you are the forefront of defending freedom. And then people chanting Allahu Akbar, and then it's music to her ears in that instance. So basically, with Abdullah Azzam operating all of these offices across Europe and the US, raising money for jihad in Afghanistan, he reaches out to other Palestinians that are interested, who later on formed Hamas, or Hamas's military wing in specific. A lot of them went to Afghanistan to receive training and logistical information and how to do this and how to do that and how to create formations and brigades and guerrilla warfare. So that's why they wanted to call it the Abdullah Azzam Brigades, because he was Gazan. Izz al-Din Qassam is Syrian, but he fought in Palestine heroic battles in Palestinian literature. So basically, Hamas in 2006, they write that letter with Haniyeh. Then they bring Ahmed Yousef to Gaza because he's known to the Americans. He's known in Washington. And he works on a proposal with the Swiss government. It was called the Yousef Swiss paper. It was his own initiative, but written in Geneva. And he goes to London. He's allowed into the UK on an exceptional visit by Tony Blair himself, Ahmed Yousef, and a member of Hamas's parliament caucus who was called Sayyid Abu Msameh. And they meet with IRA and Sinn Féin leaders in Northern Ireland. They're taken to Belfast, they're taken to the Parliament, House of Lords, House of Commons, etc., to the Guardian, to different newspapers. They're given a full tour. And Yousef's paper that develops after is basically premised on this: full cessation of hostilities, building trust between Israelis and Palestinians, and between Israelis and the entire Arab and Muslim world. They were saying that the Arabs and Muslims don't trust that Israel will deliver on any promises, because we've seen it play out many times. So instead, what we propose is a period of cessation of hostilities, expanding Palestinian freedoms. Treat us better. Show the Arab and Muslim world, rebuild faith, show that you can treat Palestinians better, so that they would give us more wiggle room to negotiate and end the occupation based on the two states. That was the premise. It was even premised on the idea of a temporary Palestinian state with temporary borders in Area A, B of the West Bank and in Gaza. So it's only about like 30-something% of the West Bank's area, and that the borders would expand gradually alongside the negotiations. When that paper reached to Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, he called it worse than the Balfour Declaration, Arthur Balfour's declaration that gave Jews the right to Palestine. He called it worse than the Balfour Declaration. That's how lenient it was. That's how much they were bending backwards to try to get any resonance from Washington or what is called the international community. The response in return, Washington and Israel, they immediately pressured Tony Blair to never allow Ahmad Youssef or any Hamas leader into the UK ever again. And they pressure Europeans to cut any talks with Hamas. And they pressure and pressure and pressure. And they come up with what is called the quartet principles that later on Jonathan Powell would admit, Tony Blair's chief of staff, that they were deliberate non-starters to get Hamas to reject them so that they can blame them for what comes next. Defunding, boycott, deplatforming, etc. It was basically the quartet principles. Hamas disarming, renouncing armed resistance completely. Hamas recognizing Israel unconditionally, unrequitedly. Hamas abiding by the Oslo Accords and all the accords that Israel does not abide by at all. Hamas does this, Hamas does that. And what's in return? Hamas would be spoken to as the official government of Palestinians, but they just won a legitimate election. Jimmy Carter called it completely free and fair. He came to monitor the elections in Gaza. So the defunding of the PA, I see more and more of my family members, like we would go for a day with only one meal. We would starve for days because it was coupled with an immediate siege on Gaza, Israel restricting anything from coming in, anyone from going out, restricting food to a minimum. Then the natural result, a coup, starvation, everything is miserable, no one has any income, and you don't have any food on the table, and everyone is blaming everyone. The natural result was basically the civil war that we saw. Hamas takes over, and immediately you see Israel implementing what's been always on the agenda. So in 1967, Moshe Dayan, on the eve of the occupation, he says this. He says he is Israel's defense minister from the Labour left-wing party. He says, we will tell Palestinians we have no solution. Whoever wants to live here shall live like dogs. Otherwise, they should leave. And we will see where this process leads us. And maybe in 5 years, 200,000 Palestinians would leave, and that's a very substantial thing. Basically, like the whole premise of the occupation of the territories is Israel knew it couldn't replicate 1948. So instead, make it as miserable as possible so Palestinians would leave. But it was coupled here with the other era of mowing the grass.
Sorry.
Anyone that tries to fight back.
Mohammed, before we start with the mowing the grass, so you're saying from those 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, 200,000 people left Gaza?
No, that was basically Moshe Dayan's statement in 1967.
That was his hope. His hope. Okay,
between 2007 and 2020, about 250,000 Gazans had left.
Okay,
so it's way higher.
Okay, so now let's go. Let's go to the what the Israelis refer to as the mowing of the grass, the various operations in 2008, 12, 14, 21, and many more minor operations. I wouldn't call them minor, but by the extent of those big operations, minor operations. There's two things I want you to answer, because I think it's great that you're speaking a lot, because there's a lot of information here which is really important and hasn't been expressed before. So I want to kind of use this opportunity to ask a bunch of questions and then have you answer them all, because I just think that that's what you do, and I think it's great because there's so much we're learning here. But so what is it like to experience those operations? But also, we do also see that Gaza, despite those operations, Palestinians do rebuild in Gaza. There's a very restricted life, but there is a life. There is, weddings start occurring. There are food that comes in. There's the tunnel system that is built between Egypt and Gaza so that goods can get in illegally. But, there's also this sumud. The kind of making life livable again is part of sumud. And it does. So just explain all of that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the tunnel industry, basically you had Gaza starving to near death. Israel enacted what was called the calorie count. So they calculated how much calories do Gazans need to survive but not live properly. So a male adult, for example, needs about 3,000 calories per day. The Israeli calorie count was 2,200 calories per person, per adult. And basically they calculated how many trucks of food do we need to allow in, how much Gaza can produce on its own inside Gaza. And they deny that this calculation went through, but Gisha, the leading Israeli organization that monitors Gaza, basically says that the number of trucks that were allowed in Gaza were way less than the calorie count. So the only way that you can get food is to tunnel your way to get it. And that's when you had the tunneling industry thriving. There was an episode in which Gazans broke into Egypt and went to, basically, people went to do shopping and then went back to Gaza again. And the tunnel started to develop after. So I remember, like at some point, we're sitting at home. My father gets a phone call. He panics. He puts on his clothes. He runs out. And basically, the phone call, there is food in the market. As simple as that. There's food in the market. Because for a long time, Hamas's slogan, the Hamas government's slogan, Ismail Haniyeh would always go and say, we will survive off thyme and dukkha, which is basically like herbs, condiments. And basically, he would say, we would survive off thyme and dukkha, but we will maintain our pride and dignity. That was his slogan. So suddenly there's something other than thyme and dukkha in Gaza. So my father runs to the market. He buys some Twinkies and Ho-Ho's cakes, these sort of sponge cakes, comes back with it. It's completely flattened and crushed because it went through a tunnel, and basically gives us each a piece for each. I treasured mine. I put it under my pillow, and I didn't trust that I would get another one. So I was like, I should save it for a good occasion. And then the tunnels start to slowly develop until they become a whole industry. It became a mark of prestige to get something smuggled through a tunnel. So at some point, there was a guy that smuggled his fiancée from Canada, I think, through a tunnel in Gaza. They took pictures in their wedding gowns in the tunnel. There were people that smuggled vehicles, cars into Gaza. There were people that smuggled KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, into Gaza. And it would arrive from Sinai. It would cost about 100 shekels, $35 for a small meal. But it's like something that's coming from the outside world. Most people in Gaza never stepped aside outside of Gaza. They've lived there their entire lives. Most people in Gaza have never seen a plane, a civilian plane, a traveling passenger plane. The only planes they see is Israeli F-16 war jets and Apache helicopters and drones. And basically, like, you had this one development. The other development is Israel left Gaza. So now they can bomb the hell out of it freely because the settlers are not there. The Israeli military redeployed. So instead of being inside the prison camp, they just went to redeploy outside the prison camp and maintained a siege on land, air, and water. And you had Israel immediately swarming Gaza skies with drones. So that's the new era of basically drone warfare on top of your head 24/7, wherever you go, no matter where you are. There's a buzzing sound that never goes away. It's like zzz, 24/7. And Israel sometimes would even control the altitude of these drones based on what kind of message they want to send to the population. If they want to intimidate us, they would bring the drone all the way down that you can hear it all night long and it's driving you insane, and you try to like smash the windows in order for it to stop, and it never stops. So that's one thing. Then the mowing the lawn begins. So I lived in Gaza for about 2 decades, and basically there I survived about 10 Israeli high-tech killing sprees, what they call military operations, and they always had these fun names: Operation Rainbow, Operation Summer Rain, Operation Pillars of Defense, Operation Protective Edge. So I lived through 10 of these, and 3 wars: Cast Lead, Protective Edge, Pillars of Defense, and 2 ground invasion, 2014 and 2008. And none of it, all of it combined, if I can put all of it in one side, it wouldn't match 1% of what people in Gaza are exposed to now. But basically, Cast Lead was the one that got the most attention in terms of like mainstream media attention. Israel enacted this logic. Gaza's siege serves 2 functions: suppression, collective punishment, and containment, pacifying the population until they rise up against Hamas, or to keep them quiet. Or the second function was complete separation from the West Bank, keeping Gaza unlivable so that long-term more and more people would leave. You literally had Israel bragging in 2019 and saying, oh, we are actively looking for countries to take Gazans, and we are actively encouraging migration from Gaza. That was the second logic. But they understood that if you put people in a prison camp, of course they will try to fight back. And that's the mowing the lawn logic. Israel understood that every year or every other year, they have to go into Gaza and cut the blades, decapitate as many people as it takes to push people back in line, to whip us into silence. So Operation Cast Lead happens. I was going to school on that day, and as soon as I arrived there with the school bus, we hear massive airstrikes everywhere. One of them targeted the police academy, the civilian police. There was a graduation ceremony, so the body parts were scattered everywhere. The bus driver tells us to come in. We drive back home. On the way home, you can see basically rubble, body parts, people. I get home, I look outside, and there's smoke coming from every direction. I thought, okay, this is it. My mother was outside. My father had died by the time because of Israel's blockade. And my mother is outside. My siblings are outside. And there's no way of knowing where they are. There's no way to know if they're alive or dead.
Mohammed, you said your father passed away because of Israel's blockade. How did he pass away?
Well, I lost several family members. You basically get sick. Israel collapsed Gaza's entire health sector. They would restrict the entry of CT scan machines, of MRI machines, of basic X-ray machines. They would restrict the entry of basic medicines into Gaza, that if you get any kind of sickness, your chances of survival are very grim. So that's how I lost my father, my grandfather as well. With my father, it was the most painful. Also with an uncle, with another uncle, with an aunt, with several family members. But with my father, it was the most painful because I had to watch it, sit and watch it every single day as he became more and more sick.
What sickness did your father have, and how could it have been? I mean, yeah, continue.
Yeah, so basically he had colon cancer, which was treatable. He was a doctor himself. His colleagues, his friends as well, would agree on this. And basically, in his final days, he would basically get thinner and thinner and wither in front of our eyes. There's nothing to do about it. I was a child at the time. I was 12. And basically, I would go to my room and pray all day and all night until I fall asleep. God, please take me, not him. Please let it be me. Please let it be me, not him. Please take me, not him. Over and over and over and over again. And I would read the Quran nonstop, hoping that it would be me instead of him. And I was 12-year-old old at the time, but that's the scenery I was forced to watch every day with nothing that you can do about it. One night he knew that he was dying, so he asked us to get him some figs. So I went to the street and I tried to find figs. I went to one shop after the other. I went even into pharmacies to see if they had dried figs, because they used to. I tried to find any other kind of fruit. There was nothing. I couldn't go back home and tell him that to his face, so I just stayed downstairs until I knew he would have fallen asleep by then, and then I snuck up. And in his final days, he died basically from a cold infection. His immune system is weakened by the cancer, and he dies from a cold infection. At the hospital, they didn't have any medication to give him. The only thing they would give him is painkillers until he was basically bedridden. He couldn't move. He couldn't talk. He couldn't recognize me anymore. I walked into the hospital, and on his final few days, his eyes are looking at the ceiling, horrified. He is just getting more and more and more and more painkillers. And that's how he passed out. The medical diagnosis, it was a cold or a flu infection. It was kind of bacteria that was called at the time, I think, Caspella or something of the sort, that causes extreme symptoms of cold. It's the same with my grandfather. He had problems with his kidney, walked into the Shifa hospital, stayed there. Basically, the electricity is going off and on. Since 2006, Israel bombed Gaza's single sole power plant. So we had electricity for 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day. The electricity goes down, the machinery is off. The hospital operates on generators. They run out of fuel when Israel restricts it. So that's how my grandfather died as well. Over and over again with many family members, friends, and loved ones. It's completely preventable death by the simplest of reasons.
Okay, you were collecting. Before I interrupted you, you were recollecting for us what Castled was like. Just for our audience, Castled's the operation in 2008 and 2009. So tell us about these various operations, but also at some point you get enrolled in the Islamic University in Gaza and you study there and you leave. So how does that occur? And also, I'm interested to know, but when you get there, about sort of the economy in Gaza and how it worked, because there's a lot of restrictions, there's sanctions, there's your coriander is banned, parsley is allowed. Those things change and things don't. But through Sumud, which is through a form of almost passive resistance or resisting through existing, right? There is an economy and a life that is built. So how is that built outside of the tunnels? What kind of sense of collective community do people in Gaza develop so that they can actually live a life until Israel has now completely destroyed it post October 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. So the chronology of events would be caste-led, and then economic survival, and Israel reducing the siege a little bit to satisfy the international community after Mavi Marmara. So with Cast Lead, as I said, starts with an opening strike on dozens of targets across Gaza. Most of them are basically civilian government infrastructure at the police academy, the civilian police, etc. And it develops from there. It was one of Israel's bloodiest campaigns on Gaza. A Jewish South African judge, Zionist himself, Richard Goldstone, described it as a campaign to, quote, punish, humiliate, and terrorize the Gazan civilian population. It was a campaign of collective punishment, and it was done. Israel did it immediately without provocation, although there was a ceasefire in place. There was a ceasefire that they agreed with Hamas about right before. There was another ceasefire proposal that Hamas came up with. It was called the Ayman Amira Menachem Fruman. Amira Fruman agreement. It was an Israeli rabbi and a Palestinian journalist close to Hamas in the West Bank, and Israel disregarded it completely. So with Cast Lead, Israel advances also with the ground invasion, and we see Israel using white phosphorus all over Gaza. And white phosphorus, it basically, if you throw it anywhere, it ignites fire that's impossible to turn off. No matter what you do, if you try to throw water on it, it ignites more fire. It ignites fire, it catches fire by just basic contact with oxygen. And Israel was using it like candy. And the sceneries that we would see is basically in the early morning or during the day. It was like Judgment Day. You would see floods of people just walking aimlessly, people displaced from Shujaiya, from Jabalia, from other parts of Gaza, just walking aimlessly like Judgment Day. They don't have anywhere to go. They don't know where to run. And they would eventually settle at an empty UN facility, at an UNRWA school, most likely. And back then, like, we understood, okay, if things get too ugly, you run to an UNRWA school or a hospital, or you stay at a place near journalists, because Israel did bomb those, but the likelihood of bombing them systematically like they do right now was not as high as bombing randomly, like dropping bombs on different homes and then claiming that there was a Hamas target. It would be more difficult for them to bomb a hospital and get away with it. One time is okay, 2 times is okay. Apparently, with the international community, they did bomb some hospitals like Al Wafa Hospital and others. But if they do it systematically at that point, 2008, it would have gone too far. So we understand, okay, if things get too extreme, we run there. But then Israel bombs or throws phosphorus bombs on the Red Crescent facility, right where we live. Ambulances, it's next to the Quds Hospital, Tel El Hawa. Ambulances catching fire, the warehouse is catching fire, etc. They targeted a lot of these facilities. At some point, there's the ground invasion advances to our neighborhood. Overnight, ironically, I was like sitting in the living room and playing PlayStation. It was a game called Medal of Honor, and it was Second World War. And like I'm in the game, like fighting against a tank, and then we hear an actual tank approaching. It was like a heavy truck that's moving, and as soon as it stops, it immediately starts firing nonstop. And then we start getting this white smoke coming through the window, which is white phosphorus. We heard about it on the radio. Like, you would get electricity for maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and you have the radio in between. And basically, we heard about it on the radio. So as soon as it came in, we had heard that if you inhale it in large concentrations, it's lethal, or it can permanently damage your lungs irrevocably. So as soon as this happens, my mother and oldest brother, they say, okay, we need to run. My youngest sibling was only 1 year at the time. He had just been born right before the war. So we carry him. I put my hand on his mouth so he doesn't scream or yell, and we're tiptoeing our way out. But you cannot step out of the building. If you do, you would get killed. I'm about to turn the light on the staircase. My brother yells at me, don't, they'll shoot us. So we crawl slowly on the stairs into the garage. It was underground. It was like a residential building with apartments. So it had a garage that also was a basement. My late father's car was in it, and we hide in the car. And my mother's desperate attempt to make us feel a little bit safer was to basically soak some towels with water and tell us to cover our faces with it. And she said, okay, if the white phosphorus comes through, it wouldn't kill you if you have that towel on. And we were just sitting in the car hours and hours and hours and hours until the next day, for some divine intervention that I never understood what the reason was for the IDF. They withdrew a little bit. They advanced the next day. So we had a brief window to flee. And in that brief window, we tried to call the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, UNRWA, other organizations. Either they wouldn't answer or they were too overwhelmed. And the only way that we can evacuate was to basically call a journalist to come and pick us up in his car that was press marked. And that's the only way we got out. It's ironic that today, if you do this, if you have a press vest on or a press mark, you become a target. So that's Operation Cast Lead. But what was most remarkable about it was basically the flood of human rights reports and media attention on Gaza at the time, the flood of internationals that came to Gaza, foreigners, doctors, etc., journalists, everyone wanted to come and see. So that it was like a major, major, major episode. And Israel, after this, goes after Richard Goldstone with all sorts of blackmails, etc., until he retracts his report. So when he retracts, it has this resonating bombing effect in the international community, in the human rights industry, in the media, that Richard Goldstone, with all his might and glory, was brought down to his knees to take back his words and say that he lied about accusing Israel of basically terrorism. If they can do it to him, they can do it to any of us. And that's when you have the period of silence that follows up until the genocide, including until today. Like immediately after Richard Goldstone's retraction, attention to Gaza dies out. There's always this dynamic. An Israeli member of Knesset, of all people, admitted it to me once. She said that whenever Gaza stops firing rockets, it dies out completely. Nobody bothers with anything that's happening there. You can all die for what it's worth, and nobody's going to bother talk about it. It's no longer on the agenda. It's the same in South Africa until today even. Like in South Africa, if you want to get the media's attention, the government's attention, you need to burn tires. Otherwise, nobody's going to show up. And it's a similar dynamic here. But there was this moment of concrete attention and trying to break the blockade and the flotillas and boats coming into Gaza. Some of them made it before Cast Lead. And then Israel expected that those boats would tire out and stop coming, but they kept coming over and over again. So Israel decides to launch a major attack on one of the boats. It was the Mavi Marmara incident with Turkish activists on top, and killing some of them, accusing them of basically having weaponry. The weaponry was binoculars and a couple of pocket knives and a stick. And Israel's leading journalist at the time, who became a prime minister a couple of years ago and now the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, he writes a column in which he says what Israel should have done is to fill the beach with weapons and bring all the international media to film it. And they don't have to lie. They just say, look, we have this weapons cache. And the journalists would put two and two and say these are the weapons that were found on the Mavi Marmara flotilla. Israel did not heed his call at the time. They were not sophisticated as now in terms of propaganda, but now you see it playing over and over again. At the Shifa hospital, they go and level the place, destroy everything, and they couldn't find any tunnels, any functioning tunnels. They found one tunnel that looked very much similar to the hospital, and Ehud Barak comes and says, these tunnels were built by us. So instead, they put these 4 Kalashnikovs, one of them in an MRI machine. Although it has a very strong magnetic field, it doesn't add out. The next day, they're like, okay, so you didn't believe us? How about this? They put the biggest stockpile of weapons I've ever seen. And they say, look, all of these are Hamas weapons. But in that stockpile, they forgot there was an Israeli drone, and the insignia on the vests in it was the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Sarai al-Quds, not Hamas. So it failed again. So they heeded the Yair Lapid's call, but later on. Mavi Marmara, it had a resounding effect. Like with Mavi Marmara, Netanyahu gets a lot of pressure to reduce the blockade on Gaza. And he does. He reduces it. Basically, he allows hummus into Gaza, processed hummus. That was the reduction of the blockade. And processed hummus is under the condition that it should not have any topping on it. If it had any pine nuts, mushrooms, or chili, it was still banned for security reasons. That was how insane it was. So you get to 2011, and that's the moment where Gaza gets half a chance of life. The Arab Spring is happening. You have a new Egyptian government, the military council, and then you have the Muslim Brotherhood, and they open up Gaza, both of them. They open up the Rafah border crossing to Gaza. Egypt's blockade on Gaza is because Israel is the one demanding it, and Washington is the one pressing Egypt to maintain it. But when you had a moment of revolution, the Washington pressure was not as significant. They opened it immediately. And that's when Gaza starts to thrive, You had all these shopping malls that are being built. So nowadays you see Israelis pointing to these shopping malls and saying, look, Gaza was not a concentration camp. So in that 2-year window, 2011, 2013, you had Gaza thriving, booming. There were campaigns to clean the streets. It was called Gaza Ajmal Ragm al-Hisar. Gaza is more beautiful despite the siege. There were all kinds of cultural events. We had Yusuf Qaradawi. We had poets, Hisham al-Jakh, Neom Chomsky. We had lots and lots and lots of people coming over, thousands and thousands of activists. You couldn't keep account of who's coming and who's going. And Gaza was opening up. It was given half a chance. And things were moving in a direction of sort of moderation, what Israel would refer to from Israel's own perspective, because 2012 comes, Israel bombs a Hamas commander, military commander, he's called Ahmad al-Ja'bari. And Aluf Ben, the chief editor of Haaretz, he writes an article in which he says, we killed our subcontractor in Gaza. We killed our subcontractor. Why did he call him subcontractor? Because Ja'bari was advancing a permanent ceasefire proposal in Gaza, and he was the one that created what was called the Field Control Unit, what was in charge of enforcing the ceasefire and making sure that nobody would attack Israel in order to not give Israel a pretext to attack Gaza back. And Israel decides to kill him at his peak moment of moderation, at his peak moment of extending another olive branch. And that's why you end up with Operation Pillars of Defense. Israel starts destroying, it's like in a rush, they're in a hurry. They try to destroy as many central locations in Gaza as possible. So when the dust settles and people go out, they would see these things and it would traumatize them. So I remember I went to Jundi al-Majhul, downtown, the city center, and lots of buildings destroyed there, all around Gaza. But what Israel didn't calculate is that Egypt was open. So you had Egyptian activists, Arab activists, international journalists coming into Gaza and documenting this. The Egyptian prime minister came into Gaza. So that war ended within a week. And you didn't have any sort of noise about it like the one we had after Cast Lead. Then 2014, you had a more major war, 51 days. And that was way more devastating than Cast Lead, but way more disappointing in terms of global silence and media bias. Everyone got the memo. Don't be the next Richard Goldstone. You're going to be martyred. Don't be a martyr. Don't be a fool. And you see it basically for the entire 51 days, repeating the same talking points. Israel left Gaza, the greenhouses, surgical airstrikes. And then you had John Kerry at some point on TV saying it's a hell of a pinpoint operation. And then it was like an off-mic kind of moment. And he has to go on multiple American TVs after to apologize because he just admitted that Israel is carpet bombing the place. And Israel comes out and brags, okay, we are sending major parts of Gaza back to the Stone Age. That was Israel's later defense minister. He was chief of staff, Benny Gantz, who is now considered one of the moderates, one of the people on the left. He's in the opposition. He's an opposition leader. And basically, 2014, 51 days with this invasion that advances all around Gaza from every direction. I went afterwards with a friend on a motorbike through Shijaya, the eastern area, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia. The destruction there was unimaginable. I've never seen anything like this. And nonetheless, it doesn't even come close to 1% of what's happening now. Keep that in mind. Peter Moorer, the chief of the International Red Cross, he comes into Gaza and he looks around. He's been to Yemen, to Iraq, to Syria, to every global conflict. And he says, I've never seen that much destruction in my life. And that marks a new era. It was called Selfies with the Rubble. You get the Tony Blairs of the world, Tony Blair himself. You had Ban Ki-moons of the world, Ban Ki-moon and others, or his likes. And you had all those delegations coming into Gaza in armored vehicles, grabbing a few selfies in front of destroyed buildings, taking pictures with kids. And that's the last we hear of them. Gaza was just expected to languish and die as it is. With the economy ever since, like I had a friend who lost his home in that war, 2014. He was filled with seething rage against everyone, even us, his classmates. So he would come to the class and say, all of you have a roof on top of your head. I have nothing. I go every day to a tent that I made out of plastic, and I sit on a piece of rock, and I have all the time in the world to think that I have no home. Rifat al-Arair lost his home as well in this war, and lost about 30 members of his family. And basically, the immediate aftermath of this is Gaza is going to be frozen in time to languish and die in a permanent state of non-life. So basically, There's no international attention. An Amnesty International report, a human rights report come out, and both of them are garbage. Norman Finkelstein wrote a very long article criticizing a lot of what was mentioned in both of them. So basically, and that was it, like two reports, one UN report, and that was it. That's all the attention it got. As soon as the war is over, Gaza disappears. The reconstruction from 2014 was never finished by the time October 7th happens. It was about 80 to 90% finished. That's how agonizing it was. And Israel imposed what was called the Gaza Reconstruction Mechanism. It means every time you want a bag of cement to build a wall or a piece of concrete, you need to petition COGAT, the Israeli coordinator in the occupied territories, in advance, many months in advance, and wait for years and years and years. When it's your turn, when you get approved, their office is deliberately understaffed for that reason. When you get approved, then it needs to come through a vehicle that is fitted with a GPS, with surveillance cameras, and it comes through the United Nations, and to make sure that it goes to your home. And despite this Gaza reconstruction mechanism, Hamas built 10 times as many tunnels with that mechanism in place. So it didn't work. It was there to maintain the unlivability of Gaza. And I see basically 2015 comes, and that's when you start hearing in Gaza about suicide cases, people taking their own lives. And that's when I start noticing more and more that the idea, the wish of death, people wishing death upon themselves, has crossed the minds of nearly everyone I know. Because the only thing you can do is pacing the parameters of Gaza every day. You have all the time in the world to think that you have no life, your life is wasting before your eyes. My friend's worst day of the year was their birthday, because it's a reminder. Your life is languishing before your eyes, it's wasting, and you never got a chance to live it. Many friends would tell me, I'm afraid I'm going to die before I even got a chance to experience living. That you would reach the age of 30, 35. You had just graduated when the blockade started. You would reach 30, 35, in that range, and you've never had a job. You've never been able to move out of your parents' home, to put food on the table, to have purpose, to have colleagues. Your entire being is pure shame. You're living in your childhood room. Every time you need to open the door to see your family members, you struggle because you see that look in their eyes, the look of pity, and your head is bowed down. Every time you go to your parents and ask for 5 shekels, $1.50 to get a haircut, you do so filled with shame. You have nothing to contribute. You have no value. You have no being. You have no entity. And that's the life Gazans are stuck into. And that's when we start hearing more and more cases of suicide, and more people sleeping on the street, more and more people eating from the trash cans. Like literally, you would have parents going through the trash, sifting through it to find anything edible for their kids. And the pictures started to go more and more viral. And all the shopping malls, all the spas, all the whatever that was built in 2013, 2011 starts to gather dust because the overwhelming majority of the population cannot afford it. The economy is basically relying on 3 pillars. You don't have a private sector because you cannot import anything, you cannot export anything. You couldn't even open like anything that relies on supply chains, a McDonald's, KFC, or any sort of like supply chain reliant business, because there's nothing that goes in except for what Israel regards as humanitarian necessity, and nothing that goes out. So what happens is you have the economy relying on the salaries of Palestinian Authority employees, the salaries of Hamas employees who get paid only about 30 to 40% of their salaries, and the salaries of UN agency employees. The only 2 kinds of people that made a decent living were programmers, lucky programmers, because not everyone managed to do so, and lucky journalists. So I would see a journalist in my neighborhood from, I think he was from the Baba family, and he was working, I think, for CNN. So I would see his vehicle every day, this fancy Jeep with an Israeli license plate on it. It's in yellow, which gives him access to travel in and out of Gaza. He makes thousands and thousands of dollars every month. He's living the dream, and inside Gaza itself. But he is one out of a handful of people that could make a living. It's one of the reasons why Gaza was booming with people who wanted to become journalists or programmers. The other reason is basically understanding that the more pictures you post about what is happening in Gaza, the more Israel would think twice before committing another massacre. At least that's the hope. Now it's not the case at all, but people still do it in the hope that it would lead so. But journalism and programming was the
when you say programming, were these people working remotely? Were programmers working for companies outside of Gaza? Like, how would programmers be making money?
No, it's only working with customers outside of Gaza. Like
Okay,
if
yeah.
you work with customers in Gaza, you wouldn't make a
Yeah,
living. The
exactly.
average salary was $200 per month, and that's for the lucky few that had a salary. About I think 40, about 50% of the population were unemployed. If you get that number in any country, they would call it like the end of times, the apocalypse. About 70% or more of young graduates, the ages between 20 to 30, were unemployed. And the people that were employed either as interns, volunteers, or for something like $100 to $200 per month. I had a friend who finished a bachelor in chemistry with top degrees, with honors, and he went to work at a falafel restaurant to use his chemistry knowledge to manufacture falafel and hummus. And he was paid 18 shekels per day. 18 shekels. And 18 shekels is per month, it would be like about 550 shekels, so $150. His working hours were 18 hours a day. He would sleep for 4 hours, see his family for 2 hours, and then back to work. He worked there for 1 week and then he collapsed. He couldn't do it anymore. And then he invited us to go to the restaurant and sort of like payback. Everybody's going to come with me. I'm going to use the paycheck I got from them to see how they're going to make food and instruct them about how my hummus wants to be meticulous. One time when that restaurant opened, I went there and ordered a hummus fatta with pine nuts and minced beef on top. And then I went to pray at the mosque in the evening, and he was sitting and complaining to his friends. And he was saying, there was this asshole that came today and ordered a fatta hummus. I didn't see his face, but he ordered it with minced beef and pines and almonds. And look, this cut on my finger is from the minced beef. This finger, I burned it while trying to fry the almonds. This finger, and I looked down, I was like, oh, okay. So that's basically he was considered one of the luckiest ones because he got a job. Another friend of mine, he finished a master's degree from the UK in quantum physics, went back to Gaza. He was like an elementary school teacher for 500 shekels per month, so about $140. And that was the luckiest of society. Most of everybody else was unemployed.
Mohammed, just a
And
question.
it was deliberate.
So another talking point that you hear a lot from the media, and unfortunately from the media and from sort of Zionist apologists, is that but there was money coming in. Qatar was sending billions in. Hamas usurped all the money. They have billionaires living in outside of Gaza, and the Hamas itself in Gaza has been usurping aid. This is before the accusations post 2023 when they say they're accumulating all the food, which we still have to get to, which we will get to. But what's your retort to that? But also, while you're answering that question, you talked about at length between 2005 and 2007 how Hamas were sort of leaving out this olive branch in order to start constructive negotiations for a two-state solution with the Israelis, and they systematically kind of avoided all of that and created, a horrendous situation for really punishing the Palestinian people because of that olive branch. But sort of, could Hamas have, despite all of that, in the period after that, could they have? I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer, but what could they have done differently between 2007 and 2021?
That's an excellent question. But briefly on the question before, I'll try to be more brief. I have this problem like Abraham Lincoln. He said, the sermon promises to give short speeches, but once I start, I cannot finish.
No, I mean, it's a good thing. We very long form, and we please you use your time because
most of the money that goes into Gaza ends up in Israel. It's basically subsidies for the Israeli economy. Most of the aid, like in Gaza, you cannot manufacture anything. There were a few factories that Israel would bomb every single war. There was Al-Auda that made biscuits and another one that made some wafers and crisps. And Israel would bomb and destroy their factories every single war. And then they would go and build it over again, and then it would get bombed again. But it was like basic manufacturing of food, nothing sophisticated. But if you want to buy any clothing, if you want to buy any food, if you want to buy any electronics, it'll have to come from Israel. Like the Palestinian GDP per year, I think, is about $13 billion this year. About $5 billion of it goes into Israel.
You mean they buy products from Israel?
Buying products from Israel because we're forced to. We're not given any other choice. So, for example, the Palestinian Authority under Mohammed Shtaya around 2020, 2019, they decide, okay, we need to reduce our economic dependence and reliance on the Israeli economy. We need to buy less from Israel, basically. And they decide, okay, we're going to import cattle from Arab countries. Every month, we get 120,000 cattle from Israel. Let's get 5,000 from other countries. 5,000. So nothing substantial. Israel literally arrests and detains the cattle and they punish the PA and prevent its produce, its exports to Jordan or the Arab world and withhold its funds, and they start this trade war against the PA, you're not allowed to buy cattle that's not Israeli. That's how much they go through it to maintain the dependency. My father, he was the director general of the Ministry of Health. He tries at some point to send, like there was this was called the medical referral division in the Ministry of Health. If you need medical treatment that's not available in Gaza, you can be sent to Israel, to Egypt, to Jordan, or to the West Bank and Jerusalem. It's one of those, depending on the urgency, the kind of operation, etc., like many factors. And my father at some points, he said, okay, Israeli hospitals charge us per year $100 million, 100 million. If that money is invested in the West Bank, if we send patients from Gaza to the West Bank instead, that money is invested in our health ministry, we develop our capacity more. It's like a for-profit business. Israel would post these pictures. Oh, look, we treated a cancer patient in Israel. And they wouldn't tell you that cancer patient had to pay for it. Every penny is paid by the Palestinian Authority. And that cancer patient was most likely blackmailed at the area's border crossing for information and collaboration to be allowed to get out of Gaza and in again. That's how insane it was. Like Israel would always blackmail the most vulnerable. They would go against Palestinian LGBTQ. They would go against Palestinian cancer patients, terminally ill people, mothers, etc., whose kids are about to die. And basically, it's manufacturing of societal paranoia as a result of it. Like if you see someone that has a permit to go into Israel, you would look at them with suspicion because there's a chance, you can never be sure, but there's a chance Israel blackmailed them. And there's a chance Israel is forcing them to collaborate. So my father decides, okay, we're going to send people to the West Bank instead of Israel. Then he gets a call immediately from an Israeli military general, and he starts threatening him. And he says, you have kids, you have a family, think about those. And then he calls him an anti-Semite. And then he starts all sort of like name calling, but you're going to get called Hamas, you're going to get called anti-Semite. They wanted to manufacture this dependency. So in Gaza as well, everything that is poured into Gaza ends up in Israel's pockets. I don't remember the statistics precisely, but it was something like 60 to 80% of the money that was sent to Gaza by aid would end up in Israel. Like basically, you need to buy food, it comes from there, textile from there. Even if you get textile from Turkey, it needs to go to Israel. You need to pay customs on it and then goes to Gaza. So they would make a profit at every turn from this, like it's a money-making cash cow, this occupation system. UNCTAD, that's one of the reasons the UN Organization for Commerce and Trade, they said that Gaza's economy was cost about $20 billion in 10 years of Israel's blockade. In the West Bank, the estimate was $47 billion. It's a money-making huge machine. So basically, in Gaza, most of that money ends up in Israel again. The accusation about Hamas leaders having millions and billions, they said the same thing about Yasser Arafat. They said he's got infinite piles of money that you never see the end of, billions and billions and billions. And Yasser Arafat's wife, she was visited once by a journalist. She lives in Malta, Soha Arafat. And he visited her. He said she lived in a modest apartment. Soha herself later on admitted, she said, I get a pension from the Palestinian Authority because I'm the president's wife. I get a pension of $10,000 per month. 10,000 is considered a lot, but it's not millions, it's not billions. And they make the same charge about Hamas leaders now. It's a charge without any evidence. You see people like Douglas Murray and Mr. Potato Head and whatever making the same kind of accusation that, look, Hamas leaders are worth billions. Where's the evidence? The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Lunatics. It's insane. So the other question that you had, can you remind me of it again?
I asked about could Hamas have done anything better despite all the very difficult
exactly.
conditions?
That's the question that I liked. It's an ongoing debate amongst Palestinians, basically, who would say that should Gaza have laid down its arms after Israel pulled out and trusted that Israel would lift the siege in return? And there's two things. Number one, if Gaza did so, the West Bank would have been over by then. The West Bank would have been over 2 decades ago. Because you see it in Israeli media. Every time they wanted to kick people out of Sheikh Jarrah, every time they wanted to raid Palestinian towns in the West Bank, every time they were organizing the flag march of racism, death to the Arab march, every time they did any of these things, in Israeli media you would see people saying, no, you need to be more restrained and more contained. We don't want Hamas to start firing improvised projectiles on us, what Israel calls rockets. We don't want Hamas rockets to start raining on us, so you need to be restrained. And there was that understanding. If Gaza looks for itself, the West Bank and Jerusalem are lost. And you cannot build a state with Gaza. What's Gaza out of Palestine's area? Gaza would be like in a single digit. It would be like something like 3 or 4% of Palestine's area, at 365 square kilometers out of 2,007 and out of 27,027 kilometers. So it's nothing. You cannot build a state in that very, very, very tiny fraction of land. So that's one answer. The other is, even when Hamas laid down its arms, even when Hamas was, according to Israel itself, maintaining a transactional arrangement of keeping the ceasefire in Gaza and maintaining Israel's security more efficiently than the Palestinian Authority, because Hamas has what the PA doesn't have. Hamas has the ideological superiority over other armed groups. They can tell the Islamic Jihad, don't fire rockets. They can tell Kitab Mujahideen, any of these other groups. As I said, they had the field control unit that was tasked to do this. And Hamas did all of this. In Israeli media, they even admit Hamas provided us with information about the Islamic Jihad. That's a claim that Israel makes, to prove that it's willing to sustain the ceasefire in Gaza. They were trying everything possible to message to the Israelis, we will not fire any rockets if you let Gaza live. Israel's response to this, they rejected it out of hand every single time. Even like when Israel had this arrangement of allowing the Qatari aid, the cash infusions, to go into Gaza, it paid for fuel that is bought from Israel for Gaza's power plant. That was $10 million going to Israel. And 10 million went to civil servants in Gaza, and 10 million went into $100 cash handouts to poor families, 100,000 poor families. That's how it was distributed. And all of it went back to Israel, because everything we buy there is mostly coming from Israel. So when the Qatari cash was coming in, Israel was like, okay, we perfected an equation of sidelining Hamas. You had these escalations where Israel would bomb the Islamic Jihad in Gaza and Hamas would not retaliate. And Israel were like, okay, we succeeded to get a peace with Hamas. We got a peace understanding with them. Even then, what was Israel's reaction about the blockade? It was political suicide for anyone in Israel to say, let's lift the blockade or ease it. You had basically Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, saying it out loud. He says in 2020, 2021, on 2 occasions, he says, quote, we will not allow any real development in Gaza, any real economic development. He says, we're not animals. We're going to give them food and water, but we're not going to allow any development. In other words, they're not allowed to live. They're allowed to survive, but not live. His predecessor, Avigdor Lieberman, he says in 2018, basically he says, our policy in Gaza is to drown their bodies, keep their heads above the water, so that they can barely breathe, but not live. So that was Israel's repayment if Hamas was to dismantle itself and travel to Mars and never come back. The siege would have remained. Like Netanyahu says in 2019, he's interviewed by Israel Hayom, and they ask him, why don't you destroy Hamas? And he says explicitly, he says, if I destroy Hamas, I would have to give Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. And I don't want to do that. The West Bank and Gaza are separated. And that's a good thing for us. I wouldn't give it to Abu Mazen. And you had Netanyahu bragging, I'm allowing the Qatari cash to go to Gaza to fuel the Palestinian division. So there is no intra-Palestinian urgency for reconciliation if Gaza can survive on its own without the Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
So you had all these, like Israel is not leaving you a room to think and reflect for introspection, to say, should we have done this differently? Should we have done that? Because no matter what you do, the Israeli equation is they don't want you here. They either want you dead or gone. There's no other way that they can allow you to live here. If you live here, live as miserable as a dog. That was Moshe Dayan in 1967. It was reiterated by Israel's Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, in 2017. He said, I will give Palestinians 3 choices: live inferior non-citizens, leave, or fight back and get dealt with and killed. And when he said that, it was a shock in Israel. You had Moshe Alon, Israel's defense minister, right wing. He is from Likud, Netanyahu's party. He said in 2023, in March, 6 months before October 7th, he says, Smotrich's manifesto is Mein Kampf in reverse. Those are Jewish supremacists, and those are going to keep egging more and more and more. They will provoke Palestinians with a massacre here, a massacre there, torture prisoners, go at Al-Aqsa, do this, do that, until Palestinians respond, and then Israel would go for the end war, the war of the end of times. That was Moshe Alon saying it prophetically 7 months before October 7th. In the 7 months that followed, you had Israeli Knesset members, government leaders that are saying openly, we will go back to Gaza. We will return. We will return. You had Smotrich on the eve of forming the government. So in late December 2022, he goes to the Ghosh Qatif Museum. Ghosh Qatif was a settlement in Gaza. And he basically signs his name in the guest book and he writes, the evacuation of Ghosh Qatif was an unforgivable crime. We will return. Israel's Minister of Settlements, Orit Struk, she gets asked in March 2023, do you want to return to Gaza? And she says, yes, of course, and it's going to happen. Limor Son Harmelech, a member of the Knesset, stands on the podium and says, we are returning to Gaza. That's in March, April. So all of it, like another episode, Netanyahu is visiting the town Sidrot that was established on the Palestinian village Houj. Houj was a Palestinian village in which the chief of the village hid Israeli Jewish migrants from the British mandate, from the British police. He gave them a safe sanctuary. The way they repaid him was the IDF walked in, wiped out everything, looted everything, left nothing standing, and put them on trucks and sent them to Gaza. All of them. No one is left of Houj. And then built Sderot on top. So Netanyahu visits Sderot a few months before October 7th with Yoav Gallant, the defense minister. It was not reported on anywhere else other than Channel 11, Israel's public radio. And the mayor of Sderot, he says, I would like to build in Beit Hanun in Gaza. And Yoav Gallant, he says, you would have to flatten Beit Hanun first. You would have to wipe it out. And Netanyahu jiggles and laughs and he says, now we're not flattening, we're not wiping out anyone today. Like all of these statements systematically building up towards this end goal, even if Hamas laid down its arms. Like the moment that I think summarizes this the best was a Palestinian called David ibn Abraham. The reason why he has a Jewish name, he converted to Judaism. His grandfather, he rescued Jewish migrants in Palestine in 1921 when what was called the Hebron massacre was unfolding. Provocations at Al-Aqsa Mosque, provocations here and there, and then it turns into this episode. His grandfather rescued Jewish migrants. So his grandfather is supposed to be a hero from Israel's perspective. Davidi ibn Abraham converts to Judaism, studies the Torah by heart, befriends Israeli rabbis, far-right rabbis. He befriends the underground rabbis like Dov Lior, the rabbi that Ben Gvir and Smotrich listen to the most. And basically, Davidi tries to apply for status in Israel. He gets rejected every time. He applies to be recognized as a Jew. He is rejected by default. Like in Israel, even if you convert to Judaism as a Palestinian, you will be denied. Anyone else from Africa, Asia, Europe can convert and then be admitted. There's a Fox News journalist that converted to Judaism, changed her name, I think 2023, and she's allowed to move to Israel now. There's someone from China that did so as well. But a Palestinian rejected out of hand. And basically, Davidi then applies for asylum. He says, I'm persecuted by the Palestinian Authority. I live in Hebron. I'm persecuted by other Palestinians. Take me in. And he's rejected out of hand as well. And in 24, I think, he passes through a checkpoint a checkpoint near Hebron. And at the checkpoint, the journalist, the soldier yells at him, drop your bag, arms up. And Davidi says, I'm a Jew. My name is Davidi. And he says it in fluent Hebrew. And the soldier gets so agitated, so angry, and shoots him dead immediately on the spot. He's like, how dare you call yourself a Jew? Like, there's nothing Palestinians can do to survive this. Nothing. Hamas could have tried a lot of things differently. I have a lot of thoughts on that. But there's nothing that would convince Israel of our humanity. Like Hamas, they tried to support and take part in what was called the Great March of Return in Gaza, 2018, 2019. It was phenomenal. I had lots of friends that went there. Once a week, 100,000 to 150,000 Gazans would march there, bare-chested, overwhelmingly non-violent, according to Amnesty, Human Rights, the UN, etc. They would go bare-chested once a week, every Friday, every Saturday, it depends. And they would go there and basically stand at the fence and call for the right to life. Some would play music and dance, some would have tents and cook Palestinian food. It was like an amazing mosaic of cultural melting and cultural experiences coming together. And basically, some people would go and try to touch the fence and go back. Some people would try to breach the fence and cross to the other side to see basically the villages where they come from. Most Gazans are from these villages. Israel's defense minister, again, Moshe Dayan, in 1956, he is eulogizing an Israeli soldier that was killed in Gaza. And he says, we should not condemn his killers. How can we condemn them? How can we condemn their hatred for us when they stood watching from behind that fence all of their homes that have been wiped out and all of their villages where we are now building our towns and cities? So basically, you had people going there every Friday to the Great March of Return. Israel's response lined up their best sharpshooters along Gaza's perimeter fence, and they started taking pot shots from the first day. An Israeli minister came out and gave a humane solution. He said, let's parachute food deep inside Gaza because Gazans are starving. Let's parachute food deep in there. They will run after the food and get distracted. But they don't listen to him. Instead, they go out with the other solution, crush it. And the focus was not the killing. They killed 215 people. The focus was maiming, leave people disabled. It was seen on a video in the West Bank where an Israeli soldier is telling his friend on the camera, he's seeing Palestinians approaching a demonstration, and he says, should I shoot now? And his friend says, if you shoot now, they will run away. No. You should wait until they come close and shoot one of them, turn him disabled. Then when everyone in the village sees him on a wheelchair for the rest of his life, he would be the tail that terrorized them from rising up against us. And that was the logic in Gaza. 43,000 people maimed. In every street, in every corner, you had an amputee. Even like Gaza started to form amputee football clubs, multiple of these, amputee basketball clubs. And Israel took delight in shooting those people. Like you would have Israeli soldiers describing it to Haaretz, saying, I shot the highest number of knees in one day, 42 knees in one day. And only one soldier was ever convicted for these killings and maiming. He was sent to community service because he admitted he fired at a child without any instructions. So community service, I think it was like 20 days of community service. That's how insane it is.
Mohammed, the 43,000 figure you cited, what's the duration of that? Like from what year to what year is 43,000 people maimed?
Yeah, absolutely. It started in 2018.
This is during the March of Return.
Until 2019. It started in March on Land Day, and it continued until 2019. And Israel manages to kill it with these infusions of cash into Gaza to pacify. It was conditioned on killing the protests, the demonstrations gradually.
Okay, and so during that period, 43,000 Palestinians are maimed. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Look, we are.
And they targeted medics, they targeted journalists, they targeted double amputees, they targeted kids, they targeted women. My brother went there and he was wounded while standing about 400 meters away. Another friend of mine, his camera was shot in the lens while standing about 300 meters away. Another one of Palestine's like athletes, an Olympian, he was shot in his kneecap while filming 300 meters away. Another friend, and yet they still kept going. It was phenomenal. It was extraordinary. The energy there was like nothing I've ever seen. The determination to go one time after the other. Every person that went there was instructed explicitly, you go there only with a Palestinian flag, you don't bring any weapons, you don't stir any problem. They started burning tires to create a smoke screen for the Israeli snipers to not see them, and some started to throw rocks and some with Molotov cocktails, but it was a very marginal, fractional thing that developed later on after Israel started to kill dozens. And I know like there was one guy from the Haniya family. So Ismail Haniya is his uncle. He is nicknamed in Gaza El Jaish. They call him the military guy because he's like this puff, hulky guy. And he kept going every week to the Great March of Return, one week after the other, just standing there and watching. And his parents would cry. They would beg him, don't go there, don't go there. And he wouldn't listen. Some of Ismail Haniya's kids went there and they got shot. One of them was wounded in the neck. Another one, he was also from the Haniya family. He went there. He managed to cross the fence briefly with a few people. There were incidents in which they would manage to cross and then they would run back. And basically, when he managed to cross, Israel started bombing them with mortar shells, with artillery, with snipers, machine guns, etc. And it was reported in the New York Times that a Hamas military vehicle crossed the fence today and engaged with our soldiers, and there was an epic battle, and they shot RPGs and we shot back, and it was like this whole dramatic narrative. And then 972, a journalist there, refused to let it go and kept asking Israel for years and years, show me the evidence of this, show me the names, show me the details, show me the evidence. And then he wrote an article eventually saying this incident never happened. Israel fabricated it out of thin air. It was the same as Anas al-Sharif. Yasser Murtaja, the journalist, was shot in the first days of the protests, and Israel came out and said he's a Hamas employee, a Hamas security operative. He's on Hamas's payroll. But they didn't know that Hamas had actually arrested and beaten him up for filming unauthorized. They didn't know that he got a grant from USAID after extreme vetting that he had nothing to do with Hamas. The American government, like more sophisticated, more extreme than Israel. And when they realized this, they were like, okay, we will investigate the incident. And we've never heard anything about the investigation. Instead, we got a remark from their defense minister at the time, Avigdor Lieberman, who said explicitly, there are no innocents in Gaza. Like the genocide that's unfolding now has been premeditated in Israel since 1948, over and over and over again. It's been always on their minds. And they've made it clear repeatedly.
Mohammed, this has been fascinating, but we do now have to start talking about the present, and we don't have enough time. But we're going to try to get as much as we can. So the first thing is you currently live in Copenhagen. When did you leave Gaza? And just briefly, when did you leave Gaza, and what's that been like? And then secondly, where were you when this genocide started? And then thirdly, because again, I'm going to give you freedom to speak after this again, so that's why I'm piling up the questions. But we don't have time, obviously, to go through the last 22 months. And I think we should actually have a separate episode, because I would love to get your thoughts. I think it's very important.
I can stay for another hour if necessary.
I think you can, but I think it's just going to be difficult for our studio production and everything else. So. And I think there's a lot here, so maybe it's totally fine. But just sort of, obviously the Gaza and that you grew up in has been destroyed. It's complete rubble. I don't know how it will ever be rebuilt. So just your reflections on that, and then obviously there we go. When did you leave Gaza? What's that been like? Where were you when October 7th occurred? And what are your thoughts on what Israel has been doing to Gaza? And how has that been for you personally, as you've been reporting and analyzing and speaking to media and tweeting? What's that been like?
I'll start answering backwards.
Yes.
So how it feels. There's three feelings. One is survivor's guilt that never leaves you, of basically every time you eat a nice meal, every time you just smell fresh air, every time you take a shower, you're thinking of all your loved ones that never got to enjoy any of this. My closest friends in Gaza were killed one after the other. Two of them were decapitated when they were killed. One was a doctor, the other was a journalist. They were sort of my solid rock, the people I would talk to every day, even after leaving Gaza. And basically the other feeling is this feeling of complete disbelief that anything is happening, of this blatantness and shamelessness. Like, I've read Manufacturing Consent, I've read Orientalism. I've never fully understood them until this moment, when you see it unfolding in front of your eyes so openly, so brazenly, with mainstream media, with governments, etc. And there's the feeling, of course, of like it's almost like the Scandinavian mythology of Ragnarok. Basically, you have Thor, Odin, and Loki, and this mythology, and the event of Ragnarok that ravages and destroys Asgard, their universe, their planet, once and for all. And basically, it's the same kind of feeling. Like I have friends who have been living outside of Gaza for some years, and they told me that the first time they felt that they are actually in diaspora, in exile, is when this genocide started, because they no longer have anything to go back to. There's also, like, most of the time I try to not process what it actually means. There's no time to process it. I get the news, another relative killed, another friend killed, but you have to go on an interview in 5 minutes. You need to speak to that official. You need to talk to that government official, to that member of parliament, to this leader, to that guy, to here and there. And you need to also be present around your family, and you need to make sure that your family doesn't feel a sense of panic. You need to not depress everyone around you. So you try to defer the shock, the sadness, the trauma until a later date. And one trick to do this is to keep my mind busy as much as possible, so that I wouldn't have the mental capacity to process what's actually unfolding. From time to time, it creeps on me. I would find myself suddenly, out of the blue, crying hysterically about Ali's last moments, or Khalil's last moments, or Abdurrahman, or Anas, and basically, I try to gather myself again and say, okay, now is not the time. Wait a little bit until it's over. although it doesn't seem that it's going to be over anytime soon. But it's not only me. I was at some point at a cafe with some friends, Palestinian friends from all over the world, some from Canada, some from the Middle East, some from Europe, the US, etc., some from Al Jazeera. We were sitting together and talking, and one of us opened up. He said, "My entire family in Gaza was killed. I have only one surviving sister with 6 children. And her husband was kidnapped. He disappeared early on in the war. He was working at the Shifa hospital as an X-ray technician. He disappeared, either abducted or murdered, and she never heard anything about him anymore. His entire family, his parents, siblings, and nephews and nieces were all gone." So basically, he said, "Sometimes I actually wish if my sister dies and follows them, because she would be at a better place, because she lost her mind by the sheer load of what she has to deal with. 6 kids on her own, no family, no husband. All of them are killed. All of them disappeared. And she saw the pictures. She saw the images. Some of her siblings hacked into pieces." So he said, "I feel sometimes that it would be best if she gets to rest as well." And then people around the table started opening up. And one of them said, "I had to go to the hospital. I started having heart problems." And another one said that he hasn't been sleeping at all. He's been sleeping 4 hours a day, 3 hours a day. That's the maximum. And everyone started to open up. And I was realizing, okay, this is an event that's radioactive. I've never seen it like this before, where it's radioactive. It's impacting with a huge diameter people that are distant from it, even people that don't have an immediate connection in Gaza, or even people that are not Palestinian, are all feeling the same thing. Like even people at the UN, even people in the European Union would tell me, "Okay, I started seeing a psychiatrist, I started seeing a psychologist." It's Tom Fletcher, the Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs of the UN. He says that he's seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It's the same with many other people that are just dealing with this topic from the outside. But for people in Gaza, the worst aspect of it was being bombed for about a month and a half, nonstop, incessantly, huge number of massacres day after day, and then a temporary pause for a week, and then bombed again for 16 months, and then another temporary pause for 42 days, and then being bombed again. What this does to you, the first time there was a ceasefire, I called family and friends, and they were saying, "This is the moment where I'm understanding what it means, everything that's been unfolding around us." They've been in survival mode, adrenaline rush. You're in survival mode. Your brain is not thinking about, okay, I lost my home, I lost my family, I lost my friend. It's like your brain is dealing with it as a matter of fact. It's suppressing it, and your adrenaline is only hyper focused on how to survive, how to get by. It's like your brain goes into primitive mode, basic functions to keep you alive. But as soon as there is some quiet and the noise is gone, you get all the time in the world to internalize it. I heard Norman Finkelstein saying it, I think on your show before, where he said it about his mother as well. After she survived the Holocaust, she was asked, "This must have been the happiest day in your life." And she looked with complete disdain and shock, and she said, "Happiest? It was the worst day in my life. That's when I understood my family is gone." But the difference is that in Norman's case, his mother had the rest of her life ahead of her. She can look forward. But in Gaza, they got this moment of pause to internalize what it means. And then Israel resuming it with 10 times more intensity. That's how savage it's been. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is basically the war itself. I've been going to, I think, dozens and dozens of meetings all around Europe and the Middle East, here and there, with government officials, parliamentarians, civil society, whatever. Every time I get an invitation, I just jump on it immediately, no matter how much time it wastes. Every time I get a message from a journalist, I immediately answer. Even sometimes I get overwhelmed, like there's a lot of journalists calling, but I try my best. And it's basically to numb my survivor's guilt. And I told it to the European officials that I meet with. I said it to them over and over again. I say, "This is fraud. This is a sham. All of you here are engaging in a theater play to justify your paychecks, your job titles. You bring us here over and over again to say the same thing over and over again, and nothing changes. And you bring me again to say the exact same stuff over and over again. It's only to like put a check mark on your list. Okay, we listened to some Palestinian today, and it doesn't change anything. They decided to be complicit, decidedly, deliberately, knowingly. And yet I tell them, I decide to come back because I lie to myself and say, maybe this can create a difference. Maybe it can impact 1%. So maybe I can create some change here. And I try to like shock them into having any decency. It never works. I think the worst kind of evil that Gaza is dealing with is not the satanic evil of killing and taking joy in the murder and the rape and the blood that's unfolding in Gaza, although you see a lot of those. I think the worst kind of evil is the people that are basically betraying Gaza, taking Israel's side, or staying silent because of careerism, cowardice, cynicism, self interest, cupidity, wanting to rise up in the jobs. I've lost count of how many European officials and leaders I've heard tell me to my face saying, if I speak up, I'm going to lose my job. I'm never going to have a job again. One of them told me, and she was running the Middle East and North Africa department. She said, if I speak up, she said literally, she said, our talking points are coming out of Tel Aviv. And if I protest, if I speak up about it,
for which outlet was
I will
this?
never get a job. Not that was the Swiss Foreign Ministry. She said, if I speak up, I'm never going to get a job again. Not just at the foreign ministry, but I'm never going to get a job at a grocery store. There's like members of parliament, there's German diplomats that told me to my face when they defunded Al-Haq and all these Palestinian organizations, they said, if we continue to fund them, we know all of the Israeli allegations are garbage, but if we continue to fund them, we will be summoned every day by the German parliament, by pro-Israeli members, by pro-Israeli lobbies. So we don't want to deal with this. So in the interest of cowardice and careerism and self-preservation, they choose to do nothing. And I've met like four kinds of diplomats and officials. One is the people that want to remain ignorant. They don't want to know. They don't want to hear about it. One time I was at the German Foreign Ministry and a diplomat comes to me and says, oh, I think the only reason why Israel maintains an occupation is security. And I said, I know 700,000 Israeli settlers that would disagree with you. You couldn't drive that point to his mind. It didn't sink in. He chose to not know. He chose to remain ignorant. There's others, like I went once to Kaya Kalas's cabinet, the new chief of the EU foreign policy, and I told them about Yasser Abu Shabab and the looting gang and their connections to ISIS and Israel arming them and Israel being behind the looting and Israel doing this and that. And then she told me, wow, I've never heard that name before. I've never heard any of this. I'm like, it's a basic Googleable fact. It's been in the news since November last year. You've never even bothered to look it up. They choose to not know. And then there is the second kind of people, the people who know but choose to stay silent. So one time I went to the German Foreign Ministry and I met a very senior diplomat there who looked me in the eye and said, Muhammad, I'd like you to know that when I learned Israel bombed your family's home in Gaza, that's when the war became personal to me. And I was very touched. I said, wow, what do I mean to this guy? He's only ever met me once at a conference where he liked what I said on a panel. What do I mean to him? And then he said at the end of the session, of course, I cannot say any of what we said here publicly. Of course, I cannot speak up. Of course, I cannot do anything. Of course, of course, of course. And the third kind of people is people who know what's happening and not only choose to be silent, but take the extra mile of lying, making shit up. So the German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, she went to Israel 7 to 8 times. And I have it on good word from a top European Union leader that told me every time she went there, she would stand in front of the Israeli officials and tell them, please, 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 kill fewer people. You can keep the killing, just kill fewer people. Just a little bit less. Keep it below 100. Then it can disappear from headlines. That's the main thing she would beg for. And she went to Israel in, I think, October or November 23, around the time where women in Gaza were having their uteruses removed to prevent post-birth bleeding. And I wrote one of her advisors on the trip. I said, this is happening. She leads a feminist-led foreign policy. Make her speak up about it. And she basically didn't mention anything about it, but she wrote on Twitter this. She wrote, I'm paraphrasing, but it's basically this in Soviet. She said, I believe Israel deeply, deeply cares about the civilian population in Gaza. This is what distinguishes the humanity of the Israelis from the monsters they are fighting against, from the terrorists they are fighting against. And she would go on later on to justify bombing hospitals, schools, and make random information up that does not have any factual basis whatsoever, and make it over and over again in speeches. The fourth kind of officials is people that know what's happening, that are restrained, they cannot do much, but they're trying to do as much as possible under the radar. And the more we speak up, the more we help them. So, for example, 1,200 European Union civil servants and diplomats. They signed many protest letters to Ursula von der Leyen. Some European civil servants, they tried to organize and leak information to sue Ursula von der Leyen for complicity in the genocide in Gaza. And you can make their job easier by speaking up. And it's like one time I went to meet with a European leader. Before that meeting, he's a top European Union leader. So before that meeting, I spent weeks and weeks and weeks preparing. And I called people from Israel, from the West Bank, from Gaza, from Europe, from the US. What should I tell him? What should I tell him? I called people like Arab members of Knesset, Palestinian Authority, people here and there. Then I walked into the room, and first thing he says, this is Chatham House rules, right? And we say, yes. And he says, we are completely irrelevant. We are completely useless. We are completely complicit. And he goes on, and he describes, and he says, we're very kind. We give Israel bombs in the evening. We give you plasters, bandages, and food in the morning. So when you get bombed, you don't die on an empty stomach. And if you survive, you have plasters to put on your wounds and cover it up. And he speaks of the Germans with extreme hatred from his heart, and of European leaders. He says, I printed reports from the UN and I handed it over to European leaders, and most of them refused to even take UN reports. They told him the UN is biased. They wanted to remain ignorant in order to maintain the complicity. And he circled his iPad around the table. So about your other question, he circled his iPad around the table, and he basically shows satellite imagery the EU has been collecting of Gaza over and over and over again. And I look at each picture. I zoom in at every street, every building. There's nothing to recognize. There's nothing left. And he says Israel is wiping out the place to ensure everybody would leave as soon as the war is over. But as soon as the meeting is over, he never says any of this publicly. It disappears. It never happened.
How did you get to Denmark? And what's that been like?
Basically, I came here I was studying at Copenhagen University, something called security risk management.
What year was that?
Class started, I think, around 2020. Okay. I finished 23. I was supposed to go back to Gaza 2 days before October 7th. I was suggesting that idea to my family. Their idea was like, okay, no, it's uncertain. You never know. And I was like, it's the quietest it's ever been. I shared the same sort of political acumen as Jake Sullivan, apparently, and basically went to bed the day after, went to bed, woke up, saw on my telephone, Hamas is in Sderot, Hamas is overwhelming the Israeli military. And I went to Egypt afterwards, I think about 4 or 5 times. I tried to go into and ask about if it's possible to go into Gaza. And the answer is always no. It's been a one-way ticket ever since.
So you actually even tried to get into Gaza post October 7th?
Yes, because it could be possible for, like, if you have family in Gaza and you want to arrange an evacuation.
Okay, so you wanted to go to assist. The reason why you wanted to go is to help assist family leave.
Precisely. I also had thoughts about what it would be like to be on the ground there and going and like contributing, doing my part, reporting, etc. I kept having those thoughts for a very long time until Israel's invasion of Rafah. Then it became clear there's no way that I would go in. And if you go in, you would get killed. There's no way that you would be able to do your job. It wouldn't take long before you get bombed. So it would be a waste in either way.
Yeah. I mean, the invasion of Rafah, I think that was about March, April 2024, right? I mean, your memories...
That was May 24.
Yeah, there we go.
And I remember I was talking to friends in Gaza and they were panicking. They told me, okay, should we flee from Rafah to Deir el-Balah? But there was no place in Deir el-Balah anymore. And they were like, should we flee? Should we flee? And I was so naive. I trusted what was called the mainstream media, the international community, not the mainstream media. Mainstream media is garbage. But I trusted the international community. And I said, okay, Biden is saying Rafah is an absolute red line. The European Union is saying Rafah is an absolute red line. Both of them are threatening to suspend weapons. Both of them are threatening to force Israel to end the war if the Rafah invasion goes ahead. And I thought, okay, it's not going to go ahead. And then it happens. And I see an American diplomat who used to be an ambassador in the Middle East. And I asked him, okay, you're close to the White House. You know what's behind the scenes. Why did Biden do nothing about the invasion? And he looks me in the eye and he says, well, it's because the invasion is limited in scope. It's a very minor invasion. And I said, they are now at the heart of Rafah. They reached Tel Sultan. They're at the very center, downtown. And then he says, yeah, but they are going with a limited amount of troops. And so Israel is using, at the time, I think it was 6 battalions. They were using a huge amount of troops. And he said, yes, but they're conducting themselves in a limited fashion. And I said, well, they're burning homes as they go along. They're documenting it, like they're burning and destroying every home as they walk. And he was like, yes, but it's not as bad as Khan Yunis. The goalpost kept moving. You would have never gotten an answer. And then, like, when I cornered him at the end, I was like, why did Israel go ahead with Rafah despite Biden's threat? And he said, it's because of Biden's threat. Netanyahu wanted Biden to look like a fool. It was easy to understand. Like, Netanyahu wanted Biden to lose, and like the Washington D.C. community understood this. They didn't dare to dissent. They would rather Biden lose than dissent and criticize Israel. In Biden's last days, there was a Saudi official that I talked to, and I asked her, "Did you try to talk to him? Like, you had some influence, etc." And she said, "Yes, we tried. We tried in the lame duck period, Biden's presidency. We tried and tried and tried over and over again, and he wouldn't budge, not even 1%, because he told them and he held to the line. He wants to be remembered as the most pro-Israeli president ever, and he considered any deviation as a taint on his legacy. Look how Biden is remembered now in Israel, the opposite of how he wished to be. So, but that's his mentality at the time. They told me, like, Biden is ideological. His support for Israel is coming from his heart. It's pure ideology. He doesn't see you as human. I heard that also from American officials. He sees Palestinians as lesser humans. And that was the case. It's like even more creepy with mainstream media, because I would maintain a routine of reading Israeli newspapers, and daily I would send to friends or colleagues or acquaintances or people that I got in touch with me from different newspapers. Look, Channel 12 is debunking the talking point about Hamas being behind looting aid, Hamas being behind the famine. Or look, every single Israeli newspaper is blaming Netanyahu for the collapse of the ceasefire talks. Every single Israeli newspaper, except for Channel 14, is naming Netanyahu as the one that's obstructing the release of the hostages. And I would send it to them over and over again, and they would never translate any of it. At some point, I was talking recently to a journalist, I think from Associated Press or Reuters, I cannot remember for sure. And I told her, she asked me, is Hamas the one looting the aid in Gaza? And I was like, are you serious? Didn't you see that Channel 12 report? The IDF documented 110 incidents of looting. They said none of them, zero, were carried out by Hamas. All of them carried out by minor groups, or like by basically armed gangs that Israel provides the protection for, Abu Shabab, others, or by large families with weapons. Some of them are basically also pressured or receiving protection from Israel or collaborating with it, or desperate civilians. And the desperate civilians is also manufactured by Israel, because every time the police tries to organize and maintain civil order, Israel would bomb the policemen immediately to ensure that there is this kind of chaos where civilians would stampede and beat each other up and try to, like, this sort of sick Darwinist experiment of the fittest survives. People that are actually the most starving would not have the physical strength to run after a truck and chase after an airdrop. It's people who are less starving that would have the physical strength for this. And some people that are the least starving are the gang members, the cartels, the people that are collaborating with Israel. They would have all the energy to be there first. And that's why you see it systematically. Like, about, I think, 90% of UN trucks going into Gaza are intercepted by looting gangs or desperate civilians. So I asked that journalist, why don't you translate that report as it is, Channel 12? And she says, well, I don't know if Channel 12 is credible. I was like, Channel 12 is Israel's national television. It's the most watched Israeli television ever. They're not left-wing. They're not pro-Palestinian. It's Israel's national television. That's where Amit Segal provides analysis, the most right-wing pro-Netanyahu journalist. So why? And then she says, well, Israel, she literally says this. She says, Israel published this in Hebrew. It's not intended for a foreign audience. Your job is to translate it from Hebrew. And I've seen it, like, I talked to a former senior journalist in CNN, and I asked, like, why? Why are they like that? And he was like, well, they want to stay in the club. If you speak differently, you might not lose the job, but you might basically be not invited to parties. You might lose your access to power. You will lose your photo ops with Nancy Pelosi. You will lose, he emphasized this very much. He said, you will lose the first class and business class trips. You will lose the conference invites. You will lose all of this. So it's in the concept, the interest of preserving their careers or advancing it, that they betray Gaza. It's insane. I've never seen anything like this. Like, there's this concerted campaign to keep this disinformation by omission. They don't necessarily have to lie outright to you, but they need to turn the camera off when the worst of the worst happens, or when Israel admits its crimes over and over and over again.
Mohammed, we honestly we could speak for a few more hours, and I think all of it will be interesting. But just you need to go. Yeah, I know that you need to go. You have an appointment now. So just what's your final thoughts? I mean, there's so much more I want to ask you, but we can't now, so we'll have to do it at some other point. But just where do you think? How do you think this will end? You mentioned that when Rafah was a red line, you thought that you could still possibly go in, but after that you realize that there are no red lines, and even then, that now seems, when you think back to May 2024, compared to what Gaza is now, even that horrendous situation, that horrible situation, where by then already like 60 or 70% of all the buildings were partially destroyed or fully destroyed, and you think of it now, just what's your thoughts on all of this, where it will likely go? And again, again, I mean, you've been speaking for the last half an hour about really the global complicity from the powerful, especially on all of this. Just what's your final thoughts and message on all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the first thought, basically, what's happening in Gaza since May is Israel stopped having any combat, any battles, any fire exchanges, none of this. From June 2024, like even before then, you've never heard about the Battle of Beit Hanun, the Battle of Shujaya. It's guerrilla warfare, ambushes here and there, but there were like basically fire exchanges. Israel would meet some resistance in this neighborhood or that, or Israel would have a bank of targets in Gaza that they still want to eliminate. People they're after, assets, etc. But from June 2024, Israel itself says, we have nothing left to bomb in Gaza anymore. There are no targets. There are no battles. There's no combat. There's no fire exchange. What's happening instead is Israel methodically goes into each town and wipes it out with bulldozers, with landmines. 972, the Israeli newspaper, they reported an investigation about how the overwhelming majority of the destruction in Gaza is carried out from the ground. What it means is that soldiers are taking their time. They walk into a house, plant bombs, leave, detonate, and then the bulldozers come in and scoop it. A lot of those buildings, they still have people under the rubble. There's about 15,000 people under the rubble of homes. So those bodies will never be found. It's gone once and for all. In Gaza City, that's the most dangerous part now that we're facing. Beit Hanun, Jabalia, Rafah are wiped out. Khan Yunis is a work in progress. It's almost wiped out completely. I have a friend who went into Gaza last February during the ceasefire through the US government, and he said everything there's a thick stench of gunpowder and decomposing bodies everywhere. It was like Darfur 2003, the genocide there. And he went to talk to IDF soldiers and officers and generals, and he said, there's no souls behind their eyes. There's nothing. You're basically talking to someone whose eyes light ablaze by the mere mention of lahashmid, annihilate, to genocide. Literally, the word lahashmid in Hebrew is the thing that gets them excited. And they wanted to go back and finish the job. And that's now Israel's plan with Gaza City. I was talking to a friend yesterday in Gaza City, and he was basically telling me, he's trying to calm me down. So he's saying, Hamad, don't worry. Gaza City is not wiped out. There's still life in it. We can sustain life. If the genocide is over today, if the war comes to an end, we can build up something in Gaza. Gaza City, a lot of the buildings are still intact. There's still a lot of homes. Al-Shati is still there. Tal al-Hawa, some of it is still there. Like he was mentioning neighborhood by neighborhood. There's this, there's that, there's here. And he was trying to map out the survivability of Gaza City. And then I asked him, okay, send me videos of it. And he sent videos, including the place where he was staying. Literally, he was staying in a bombed building. They literally, like half of the building is bombed and gone. The other half is about to collapse. They're staying in the ground floor. They put some plastic. They're staying inside. The building can collapse on them at any minute. The streets are covered, even like the asphalt is covered with a very thick layer of dust from all the destroyed buildings. It's like walking on the moon. Sand everywhere, trees cut down. And he's walking in an area of annihilation. It looks like something from the video game Fallout. We're at a post-apocalyptic, a post-nuclear war, something like Mad Max, Minority Reports, Fallout, Hunger Game, and Squid Game combined in one place, all of it. And basically, he's showing me the camera around this total annihilation. And yet, from his perspective, he's willing to live in there and not leave. He still wants to be there. And he's trying to give me hope by showing this, that he can still live in a destroyed and bombed building. And he said, basically, Israeli aerial bombardment cannot wipe out an area. It can damage buildings, it can destroy here, it can destroy there, but we can still live in the ruins. We can crawl under the rubble. But in order for them to wipe it out, they need to go underground. And that's Netanyahu's plan now. Basically, when they say occupy Gaza, Gaza's already occupied, always has been since 1967. They want to go in, kick everybody out. Like Ma'arif, the Israeli newspaper, laid it out, the parameters very clearly. They said surround the city, lay a siege, bomb it incessantly, land, air, and sea, kick everybody out. Anyone that remains is considered Hamas, and start killing indiscriminately and bomb, flatten, not just bomb, flatten everything. Demolition work. Send the bulldozers, the explosive automated vehicles. What Netanyahu said, the APCs that go and detonate into buildings. He's admitting it himself, but then he's saying it's because Hamas booby trapped a building that we send an automated vehicle with a huge amount of explosives to blow up the entire building. It's insane. So basically, they want to send all of these in to finish the job. Gaza is now the Strip's largest urban center, the remaining one. Deir al-Balah is to a lesser extent. Deir al-Balah is basically 1 or 2 streets. It's a very tiny area. The Nusayrat refugee camp is a very tiny area. And Israel is planning to finish the job in all of them. It's coupled with a very sinister ploy that is unfolding in Rafah. The Israeli proxy ISIS-linked gangs, Abu Shabab, Israel established for them a pilot project of a concentration camp. Under the idea of protection, Israel provides the logistics, the money, the support, the equipment, all of it, everything. And they are using the aid that they have been looting systematically from UN convoys to lure people into that concentration camp. And Israel's plan is basically that if that pilot works, we can show it to the world and say, look, there's a thriving community there that's away from the war. Let's push the rest of Gaza into Rafah, and then mass expulsion into Egypt. Smotrich is laying it out very clearly. With that concentration camp in Rafah, it's basically in an area called El Shoka, on the borders with Egypt, in the very top east southern part of Rafah. So literally on Egypt's borders. And Abu Shabab did not have a breakthrough with luring a lot of people, but you're seeing now centers in Washington, like the Center for Peace Communication, a misnomer, and others that are showing videos from that concentration camp. And look, there's a de-radicalization process happening there. Those people, they have been re-educated to hate Hamas. Those people love Israel. And they're starting to show videos here and there to show the survivability of this concept, pushing Gaza's entire population into a one-way concentration camp and then mass expulsion into Egypt at the nearest opportunity. I asked an Egyptian diplomat, I said, in the scenario that Israel tears a hole in the fence and pushes people into Egyptian territory, how would you react? And he said, we will prevent it by violence against Israel. It would be a declaration of war. And then I asked, in the scenario that Israel commits a massacre in Rafah and then people out of their own accord blow up a hole in the fence and cross into Egypt. And he had to think, and he said, do you think Egyptian officers would start firing at Gazan civilians? It would be a catastrophe for us. So Israel is basically like leading Gazans towards the natural conclusion that Gazans should do themselves, open the fence and run into Egypt and never come back. And the whole international community understands this. It's the impression that Europeans understand very vividly. They describe it to us behind closed doors over and over and over again. That meeting with the top European leader in which he said Israel wants to wipe out the place, kick everybody out, was in July 2024. They know this. And that's why they started speaking up around the end of May. It's mainly for their own survivability to state on the record that they did not agree with this, but they're still providing the weapons, the intelligence, the spying missions, wiretapping phones, wiretapping, intercepting internet traffic, etc. All of it is provided to Israel. So the complicity is still there. Like even with something as symbolic as recognition of Palestine, France tried to create as many caveats and loopholes in it as possible. So Macron went to Singapore, he gave a speech and he said, we will recognize Palestine on the condition of Hamas disarming, dismantling itself, leaving Gaza, never coming back, never playing any part in politics. Do you think Hamas would accept this in return for a symbolic recognition? They've said over and over again, we will disarm, dismantle if there's an end to the occupation, if there's a two-state solution, if we're given a state, or if there's a one-state solution, equal rights for everyone. But we will not dismantle and disarm and surrender before any of this and trust that the people that unleashed the genocide against us will have some mercy for us when we don't have the weapons to fight back. There's the understanding, if you lay down your arms, Israel will only kill you faster. Like Israel, the only thing that they want is minimal resistance in Gaza to carry out that plan. We saw it in northern Gaza, the general's plan. People, the primary target of Israel was depopulating it. It was not fighting Hamas. It was depopulating the area. And even after they depopulated the area, Hamas was still there in Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia. And Israeli ministers are admitting this. Jerusalem Post reported a few days ago saying Israeli government ministers are saying Netanyahu's Gaza takeover plan will not defeat Hamas and will not release the hostages. But it's still the end goal. But with European officials, like I would take satisfaction in two anecdotes. One is an American official that served in the Biden administration. And after he left the White House, a senior official, he wrote me once a message that was so pitiful. He wrote something like, "Can you please retweet me? I need to regain some legitimacy. I feel cast out by my own people, my own community. It would mean the world to me if you retweet me." And the other one was a German official that basically I tried to get a hold of him, and he took a sick leave for the past 6 months, or now it's been 8 months. And he basically, when I called him, he was struggling to articulate sentences smoothly. And he basically said something like, "Oh, I have taken a sick leave because I suffered a moral burnout. I couldn't keep up with Baerbock Schultz anymore. And I need to now take my mind away from it. That's why I'm working on a literature science fiction novel about bureaucratic demons." I've seen other officials that turn the other way. There's people that have worked in high places in the EU that have now quit and are writing books and are speaking up and are doing tours, the same in the State Department. And this did not come out of basically them realizing slowly what was happening. Because if you follow mainstream media, you will never get that impression. You will never be educated. It was the fruit of the constant mobilization, lobbying, protesting, speaking up, shaming, naming. So keep it up. It works. It pays off. I've seen it. I've seen it with Kaya Kalas's cabinet. They told me all the emails she keeps getting from concerned citizens are having a huge impact. They're causing a headache. They wish if it's gone, but it's having a huge impact. It sets the mood. And Israelis are very good with this. They would flood a newspaper with tens of thousands of messages to protest one line in one article until that newspaper takes it down. And then they would celebrate it as a victory to delegitimize the whole media coverage of a certain specific incident. You've seen it with the emaciated babies in Gaza. They fought tooth and nail against the New York Times to put an editorial note saying that kid had a pre-existing condition, that one kid had a pre-existing condition, although the kid was starving as well, died from starvation. The kids are not only dying from these pre-existing conditions. If you have any sort of like conditions of the sort, cerebral palsy or others, you don't turn into a skeleton. You turn into a skeleton because your immune system is weakened, you're not getting any medicine and food. So it's this combination. But even then, when they got their newspaper to write one editorial note, they celebrated it everywhere. That it's the ultimate debunking of the Gaza famine, is that the New York Times corrected and added 2 words. So we need to do the exact same thing, use that exact same tactic. Don't let them off the hook.
Mohammed Shehada, thank you so much for your time. It's been a very
Thanks so
enlightening
much for having me.
conversation. Thank you for all the work you do. You know, it really, I mean, it's you do have a prodigious memory. You know, your friends are right. And really, I hope that somehow all the work that you've been doing and others like you have been doing will hopefully bear fruit. It's been a very difficult 22 months to see. I'm sure for you it's been, you know, extremely difficult as well. But thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And keep speaking up. I admire your show.
Thank you, Mohammed. See you. Bye. Salam.